When I was in my early 20s, I lived in a cheap rental house in rural Oregon, tucked behind an overgrown gravel road just outside a logging town. It was the kind of place where everyone minded their business, and no one asked questions unless they were drunk. The house was old, creaky, and always felt about 10 degrees colder than it should have. I figured that was just poor insulation. Looking back, I know better. I was working nights at the time, which meant I slept during the day and had the house to myself in the mornings. My roommate Kyle worked construction and left at the crack of dawn. Most of the time I enjoyed the quiet, until the day it changed. It started small. Every time I came home around 2 a.m., I'd notice weird things moved around. Nothing valuable, just things like the dish sponge not in its usual spot or the blinds cracked open when I swear I left them closed. At first, I chalked it up to my own exhaustion. Maybe Kyle was messing with the stuff after I left. Then the noises started. Scratching. Faint rhythmic scratching. Sometimes from the walls, sometimes from the floor beneath me. It always stopped when I tried to pinpoint it. One morning after my shift, I came home to find the back door slightly ajar. We always kept it locked because of raccoons and the occasional stray dog. I asked Kyle about it later that day. "Nah, man," he said between bites of cereal. "Didn't even go out back yesterday. You sure you didn't forget to close it?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe it was me, but I didn't. I started getting paranoid. I bought cheap security cameras. Just those little motion-detecting ones you can monitor with your phone. I set one up in the hallway, one facing the back door, and another pointed toward the crawlspace door in the laundry room. The crawlspace was a low dirt-floored area that spanned the length of the house. I'd never been in there. The landlord had warned it was full of old insulation and spider nests. I had no intention of exploring. That changed the next night. I was at work on break around 3:30 a.m. scrolling through my phone when I got a motion alert from the laundry room cam. The notification said, "Movement detected near crawlspace." I opened the live feed and froze. The crawlspace door was open. Wide open. Nothing moved on camera, but that door had a stiff, squeaky hinge. You couldn't open it without noise, and no one should have been home. I called Kyle immediately. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. I left work early and sped home. The house looked normal from the outside. All the doors were locked. When I got inside, I found Kyle passed out on the couch, earbuds in, completely oblivious. The crawlspace door still wide open. "Kyle," I said, shaking him awake. "Did you open that?" He blinked at it groggily. "Dude, what?" "No, heck no, that's creepy as crap." We searched the house, room by room. Nothing seemed disturbed. I was about to dismiss it all again. Maybe a draft? Old hinges. Then I noticed something. Near the opening to the crawl space and the layer of dust on the laundry room floor, there were handprints, clear smudged trails, as if someone had pulled themselves out of that hole. I wanted to puke. We decided to check the crawl space. Kyle held the flashlight while I crouched down and shined my phone light inside. It was cold and musty. Dirt, plastic sheeting, cobwebs, and a thin mattress tucked far in the back, surrounded by food wrappers. Torn clothes, a plastic bag filled with empty water bottles, and worst of all, a single worn shoe. The kind nurses wear on night shifts. Someone had been living down there, for weeks, maybe longer. We called the cops. They searched the crawl space thoroughly and confirmed it. Someone had been squatting under our house. No signs of him at the time, but they found a small phone, burner style, out of battery. They took it as evidence, but we never heard a follow-up. After that night, Kyle and I both stayed with friends until we could break the lease. I still don't know how long he was under there, watching us, listening, maybe coming out while we slept. Sometimes I think about the subtle things, missing food, odd smells, noises I'd brushed off as just the house. But what gets me most is this. That camera only caught the door open. It never caught it opening. He knew the blind spots. He'd been watching long before we ever watched him. I used to be a delivery driver for a regional courier company. Mostly rural stops, forest roads, cabins, and those weird back road houses GPS doesn't always catch. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me plenty of time alone with true crime podcasts. After a year on the job, I thought I'd seen it all, until I got sent to a place locals just called Ridge Road. Ridge Road wasn't really a road. It was more like a half-paved stretch curling up into the hills, cutting through thick pine trees that pressed close on both sides. Fog always seemed to hang low around that area, even in summer. And the delivery was for a place I'd never noticed before, tucked near the very top. A small blue house at the end of an unmarked gravel path. I almost missed the turnoff. The mailbox was rusted, leaning with numbers too faded to read. No other homes in sight. I double-checked the delivery note. One medium-sized box, signature required. The recipient was someone named Jay Sanders. The driveway wound uphill, rough with gravel and mud. After a few minutes, the trees opened into a small clearing, and I saw it. An old pale blue house with a sagging porch, black shutters, and windows that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in a decade. I parked and got out, package in hand. When I reached the porch, I noticed there was no doorbell, just a brass knocker. I tapped it a few times and waited. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. Then the front door creaked open, slowly, by itself. It opened wide enough to see inside, a narrow hallway, dim light, thick dust hanging in the air. I didn't go in. Something about the air felt wrong, not stale, old, like the kind of silence that doesn't come from absence but from something waiting. "Hello?" I called, half hoping no one would answer. "Delivery for Jay Sanders." Still nothing. I gently set the package just inside the door and backed away. When I turned to leave, I noticed something odd. No tire tracks. Just mine. Like no one had driven that path in a long time. Back in the van, I logged the delivery as left at door and moved on. I didn't look back. I didn't even think about it again. Until the company sent me a pickup order for the same location the following week. A return request. Same name, Jay Sanders. When I called dispatch to confirm, they said, "Yeah, it's a routine return. Customer initiated. Should be waiting on the porch. Just grab it and go." But when I returned to Ridge Road, the entire path was gone. I don't mean overgrown. I mean vanished. The trees were solid, uninterrupted. The rusted mailbox wasn't there. I drove back and forth 3 times slowly, watching the woods for anything familiar. But it was like the entire house had been erased. I even pulled over, turned on my hazards, and walked part of the tree line. No driveway, no clearing, no blue house. Still, the GPS showed it. Same pin, same coordinates. But nothing existed where the map said it should. I logged the return as address inaccessible and finished my route. But the whole thing gnawed at me. Later that week, while talking with one of the veteran drivers, I brought it up casually. Told him I'd been sent to Ridge Road for a return and the place had disappeared. "You got sent up there?" he asked, lowering his voice. "Blue house, small porch." "Yeah," I said. His face tightened. "That house burned down years ago." I stared at him. "What?" "Guy named Sanders lived there, kept to himself. One day, poof, vanished. Cops found dinner still on the table, front door open. Never found him. House burned down less than a week later. Electrical fire, they said. But weirdest part, a delivery driver swore he dropped a package off there the day before the fire. Said the house looked fine. I didn't know what to say. The driver leaned in a little. "Some folks say the house still shows up sometimes, on foggy days, just for a while, like it's stuck in some kind of loop." I never went back to Ridge Road. Eventually, I quit the job, but I've checked that location on the GPS from time to time. The marker is still there. You can tap it, zoom in, even get turn-by-turn directions. But if you follow them, you'll just find trees, and a silence so deep it feels like it's watching you. When I was in high school, my best friend Emily had a twin sister named Rachel. They were identical, same face, same dark hair, same tired, distant eyes. But everything else about them couldn't have been more different. Emily was warm and funny and loved to talk. Rachel barely said a word to anyone, including her own family. Rachel had some kind of condition, though Emily never explained what it was. Something behavioral. Emily once told me their mom called it episodes, but no one ever used a specific diagnosis. What I do know is that Rachel didn't go to school with us. She stayed home and had a nurse who came 3 times a week. I didn't see Rachel much. I only caught glimpses of her at Emily's house. Usually just her slipping down the hallway or watching us from the top of the stairs like she didn't trust me. It was unnerving, but I never asked questions. Emily was my best friend and Rachel was just part of her life. Until one night she wasn't. It was the summer before our senior year. Emily and I were hanging out in her room, watching old horror movies and complaining about college applications. Around 11:30, we heard something fall upstairs, loud enough that it shook the light fixture in her room. We both froze. "That came from Rachel's room," Emily whispered. We went up together. Emily knocked lightly first, then opened the door. Empty. Rachel's bed was unmade. Her desk chair was turned over, and the small lamp by her dresser was on the floor. The window was wide open. The screen had been pushed out. I remember Emily going pale. She's not supposed to go outside alone. Ever. We searched the yard. The nurse had left hours ago, and her parents were out of town for the weekend. I offered to call the police, but Emily begged me not to. She said Rachel sometimes did this. Vanished for a few hours, then came back like nothing happened. "If I call the cops, my mom will lose it," she said. So we waited. Midnight. 1 a.m. No Rachel. Then around 2:15 we heard the front door creak open. We looked over the banister. Rachel was standing there, barefoot, hair wet, like she'd been out in the woods. She was staring straight up at us with this blank, glassy expression. Emily rushed down and started scolding her, but Rachel didn't respond. She just brushed past us and walked upstairs to her room. We followed. Rachel sat down on her bed, back straight, hands folded. Her clothes were damp and stained, like she'd been crawling through dirt. "Where were you?" Emily asked. Rachel didn't answer. "Rachel," I said gently, "did you fall? Did someone hurt you?" Still nothing. Then she looked up, and for the first time that night she said something. In a flat, toneless voice, she whispered, "That wasn't me." I'll never forget the way she said it. Calm, empty, like she was just stating a fact. Emily's face changed instantly. She knelt down beside her and said, "What do you mean? You're right here." Rachel just shook her head slowly. "I didn't come back." That's when Emily started crying. I didn't understand what was happening, and I didn't know what to do. I told her we needed to call someone, but Emily begged me not to again. I stayed the night in her room, neither of us sleeping. In the morning, Rachel was gone again. This time her window was locked from the inside. Her shoes were by the door. No sign of where she went. Her parents came home that afternoon and immediately called the police. Rachel was reported missing, again. Only she wasn't. That night, someone answered Emily's phone. She'd left it in the kitchen. When we came back from her room, the call log showed 1 missed call from an unknown number and a 12-second voicemail. I made her play it. It was mostly static at first, then faint breathing, and finally a whisper. The one who came back isn't her. Emily dropped the phone. Rachel was officially missing for almost a week. The police organized searches. Flyers were posted. Then, without warning, she reappeared on the 3rd night after the search was suspended. She was found walking along the side of a road 15 miles from their home. She was calm, no visible injuries. She said she'd been lost in the woods but couldn't explain how she got there. But something was different. It wasn't just her silence. It was the way she moved, slightly delayed, like she was mimicking the people around her. She'd smile when no one said anything. laugh a second too late. And she stared at Emily all the time, never me, just Emily. Eventually, I stopped going to that house. We drifted apart after that. Emily didn't return my texts or calls, and I didn't push. Part of me was too afraid to know what was going on. A few months later, I got a message on an old email account I barely checked anymore. No subject line, just one sentence. You saw the wrong twin. The sender. A scrambled account name that was deleted within an hour. I never heard from Emily again. I used to live in a cheap apartment building just outside the city. One of those aging brick complexes with thin walls, bad plumbing, and weird smells in the hallway no one wanted to trace. I was saving up after college, working 2 part-time jobs, and trying to avoid signing anything longer than a 6-month lease. The unit I got was on the 2nd floor right above an apartment that had been vacant for a while, 3B. The landlord told me it had been empty for over 6 months. Some older man lived there before, but he moved out and left it in bad shape. We'll be renovating it soon, he said. You'll have the floor to yourself for a bit. That turned out to be a lie. The first few nights were fine, quiet. The building didn't have many tenants, and the neighbors kept to themselves. But about a week in, I started hearing sounds from below. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, sometimes pacing, sometimes just standing. I thought maybe someone had moved in early without notice, but when I asked the landlord, he said 3B was still locked and completely empty. You sure? I asked, because I swear someone's down there. He just gave me a tired smile. It's an old building. Pipes, foundations shift, you know. I didn't push it, but the noises got worse. Late at night, usually between 2 and 4 a.m., I'd hear what sounded like whispers, low just beneath the range of understanding. It never came through the air vents or walls, always from the floor. I tried recording it with my phone once, but all I got was static. Eventually, I knocked on the door to 3B. It felt stupid, but I needed to know. No answer. I leaned in and listened, and I heard it again. A voice, clear this time, not a whisper. A man's voice, dry and raspy, saying, "You're in my spot." I stepped back so fast I nearly tripped. I went straight to the landlord's unit and demanded he open the door. He seemed irritated, but finally agreed. We went downstairs and he unlocked 3B with a loud metal key that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The apartment was empty. I mean completely empty. No furniture, no signs of life. Just bare floors, old paint, and a smell like dust and mold. "I told you," he said, pocketing the key. "Maybe the upstairs plumbing's echoing. I should have moved out then and there. But the rent was cheap, and I convinced myself maybe I was overtired. Then one night I woke up to the sound of my door unlocking. Not knocking. Not someone outside. The sound of a key turning in my deadbolt. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and listened. The door creaked open just slightly. I froze. Then footsteps. But they weren't in the hallway. They were inside. I jumped up and flipped on the bedroom light. The apartment was empty. The door was closed. Locked. But the chain lock was hanging. Unlatched. I started sleeping with the lights on after that. I wedged a chair under the doorknob every night. I even bought a white noise machine to drown out the voices. But somehow they always cut through, like they were coming from inside the apartment, not below. Then one morning while leaving for work, I saw a folded piece of paper under my doormat. No envelope, no name. I opened it and found 5 words written in pencil. Third time was the charm. I didn't know what it meant. I hadn't told anyone about the voices or the door. I asked the landlord about the old tenant again, and this time he hesitated. He finally told me the truth. An elderly man had lived in 3B for nearly 20 years. He'd become reclusive after his wife passed. Eventually, neighbors reported the smell. He'd been gone for weeks by then, just sitting in his chair, like he'd fallen asleep and never woke up. The creepiest part, when they found him, all the locks were engaged from the inside, deadbolt, chain, and latch. No signs of forced entry. and on the table in front of him were 3 keys, all identical. No one ever figured out why. I moved out 2 weeks later, broke the lease and ate the fee. I don't know what was down there, if anything, but sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night still hearing it. A soft voice whispering from the floorboards. You're in my spot. Back in 2016, a group of friends and I decided to go on a weekend camping trip. Nothing fancy, just a tent, a fire pit, and a couple of coolers. We picked a spot in the woods near an old trail system that hadn't been maintained in years, about 2 hours from where we lived. Locals called the area the Hollow, mostly because the trees formed a bowl-like depression around it. It was off the grid, quiet, and supposedly untouched. Perfect. We got there Friday afternoon, pitched our tents, and set up a fire. By dusk, we were sitting around it, swapping dumb stories and trying to scare each other. That's when Dave, one of the guys in our group, told us about the last time he'd been near these woods. He said he remembered finding a broken campsite, tent shredded, supplies scattered like someone left in a hurry. No one around, no notes, just an eerie silence. He didn't stay long. That was 2 years ago, and this was the first time he'd come back. Of course, we all gave him grief, told him he was just being dramatic. But the weird thing was, as soon as he brought it up, the woods got quiet. Like the crickets and frogs just stopped. We laughed it off. But that night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing what sounded like a second fire, popping and crackling, not far from ours. But every time I looked, there was nothing. Just our campfire and the dark behind it. Around 3 a.m. I got up to use the bathroom, or rather, a bush on the edge of the clearing, and I noticed something weird. There were footprints around our site, not ours. Barefoot, smaller than any of our feet. They circled our tents in a wide arc and then disappeared back into the woods. I stood there frozen stomach tight, ears straining for any noise, and that's when I heard it. A soft, high-pitched humming, coming from deeper in the woods. It wasn't a tune, just a droning, vibrating hum, like someone trying to mimic the sound of electricity with their voice. It faded as quickly as it started. I went back to my tent and didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning I didn't tell anyone. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. But Dave looked shaken. I asked what was wrong. He said sometime around dawn he'd woken up and saw someone standing near our fire, just watching it. He thought it was me at first, but then he realized the figure was wrong. Too thin, too still. When he blinked, it was gone. We all debated leaving, but the group voted to stay one more night, thinking we were just scaring ourselves. Big mistake. That evening, we decided to hike a bit farther into the woods, just to explore, maybe find a stream. About a half-mile in, we came across a clearing with another campfire, long extinguished. There were bones scattered around the site. Animal bones, probably. At least that's what we told ourselves. But it was what we found in the fire pit that shook me the most. Half-burned shoes, not boots, not hiking gear. Plain canvas sneakers, children's size. We left the clearing in silence. That night we barely spoke. Everyone turned in early. I couldn't sleep again, so I stayed outside by the fire, staring into it, trying not to think too hard. Around 1 a.m., the humming started again. This time it was closer. I turned off my flashlight and just listened. It was coming from every direction, like multiple voices, all doing the same low hum in perfect unison. And then, it stopped. I looked up and saw someone standing just beyond the firelight, not moving, not speaking, just there. They were smiling, not in a friendly way. Wide, wrong. Their mouth seemed too large, their posture too stiff. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. Then they stepped backward, not turned and walked. Stepped backward, keeping their body perfectly still, as if being pulled into the darkness. I woke everyone up, told them we were leaving. Now we packed up in 30 minutes and hiked out with only our headlamps. When we got to the car, Dave realized that we never took down one of the tents. He offered to run back for it, but we all stopped him. No one was going back. We never spoke about it again. No one reported anything. But a few weeks later, I went online to look up anything about that area. Found a forum post from 6 years earlier. A user had written about hearing humming in those same woods. They described the same clearing, the same silence, even the same footprints. The post ended with one line. If you hear the humming, don't follow it. It's not calling you. It's telling the others where you are. My grandmother passed away in 2021, and I was the one tasked with cleaning out her house. She lived alone in a 2-story home on the edge of a small town, one of those quiet places where nothing ever seemed to change. The house itself was old, creaky, and filled with memories. I hadn't been there in years, but I remembered the smell, a mix of lavender, old paper, and dust. She'd lived there nearly her whole life. Most of the work was what you'd expect. Clearing out clothes, boxing up dishes, deciding what to donate. But it was the attic that I kept putting off. No one ever went up there, not even her. I asked her about it once as a kid, and she just said, "It's best not to bother with that space." But I didn't have a choice now. The entrance was a pull-down ladder in the upstairs hallway. When I finally opened it, dust poured down like powder. I climbed up into stale air and near darkness. The only light came from a small round window at the far end, coated in cobwebs. The attic was cluttered but strangely organized. Stacks of wooden crates carefully labeled with dates. Shelves lined with jars, all empty. But it was what I found at the center that I'll never forget. A large table, and on it, dozens of Polaroid photographs. Each photo showed a face, close up, pale, eyes wide, not smiling. All different people. Some young, some old. Some looked frightened. Others just looked blank, like they weren't fully present. Under each photo was a handwritten note in neat cursive. Things like January 3rd, kept the voice. April 17th, wouldn't stop crying. Took the hands instead. June 2nd, returned the shell, but it didn't remember me. I stared at them for a long time. My first thought was that they were part of some old art project, or maybe photos she collected over the years. But the notes felt personal, like she knew these people, and that wasn't the worst of it. In the corner of the attic was a tall cabinet, locked with a rusted latch. I broke it open using a wrench from the garage. Inside were jars, not empty like the others. These were sealed, and each one had a yellowing label. Inside some were teeth. Others had fingernails, locks of hair, buttons, even what looked like dried-out eyeballs, all perfectly preserved in murky fluid. I felt sick, like I'd discovered something I was never supposed to see. I took one of the jars to the police. They ran tests. Human remains, yes, but no matches in any database. No one could prove they were connected to my grandmother. No one knew what to do with the rest. The investigation was short. Quiet. The local paper printed a vague story about unusual remains found in a historic home. No follow-up. No arrests. Eventually, they let me sell the property. But here's what keeps me up at night. When I went to box up the photos on the attic table, there was a new one sitting on top. One I hadn't seen the day before. It was a photo of me, taken from the side, eyes closed like I was asleep. Same close-up framing, same white border, same neat handwriting below it. It read, August 14th, almost caught me watching. I left the house that day and never went back. A couple years ago, I lived in a small basement apartment on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place you rent when you're broke and desperate to live alone. Cheap, quiet, and half underground. The windows were tiny and the ceilings were low, but it was mine. I thought I could make it work. The weirdness started with water. At first, I noticed the bathroom sink turning on by itself, just a slow drip, then a small stream. I assumed it was a faulty valve. The apartment was old, and the plumbing was noisy even on a good day. But then I started hearing it at night. The sink, the tub, even the toilet. Not flushing, but the sound of shifting water, like someone moving in it. I'd get up, check the bathroom, and everything would be quiet, dry, except the shower curtain. It was always just slightly open. I'd pull it closed, but by morning it was gaping again, like someone had slid it aside from the inside. I tried not to think too hard about it. Told myself it was drafts or the curtain rod slipping. It worked until the dream started. Every night for about a week I had the same dream. I'd be lying in bed, eyes open, completely still, unable to move or speak. I'd hear the bathroom door creak open, the sound of wet feet on tile, the feeling that someone was standing just outside my bedroom, watching. Then a whisper, not in my ears but in my head. "Don't look at me. Don't ever look at me." I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, but the apartment would be quiet. Until the night I did look. It was a Thursday. I remember because I had to be up early for work, and I went to bed around 10. I woke up, except it didn't feel like waking. It felt like being unlocked, like something had let go of my thoughts. The bedroom was freezing, silent, and then I heard the door creak. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe curiosity, maybe defiance, but I turned my head, slow, terrified, and looked toward the hall. The bathroom light was off, but the door was open just a few inches. From where I was, I could see the shower curtain, and behind it there was a shape, not a silhouette, more like a bulge, as if something tall and thin was pressing against the plastic from the inside. I stared for what felt like hours, and then the curtain shifted, ever so slightly, like it was breathing. I blinked, and suddenly the bathroom door was wide open and the shower curtain was fully drawn back, but there was nothing inside. The next morning I packed a bag and left, told my landlord I had a family emergency and never went back. I found a new place by the end of the week, but 2 months later I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name on the front. Inside was a single photo, taken from the bathroom, from behind the curtain. It showed my bed, and me, asleep. When I was around 10 years old, my sister and I shared a bathroom in the old family house. The bathroom was tiny with faded tiles and a single cracked light bulb that flickered when you moved. Above the sink hung this massive old mirror with a thick ornate wooden frame. It wasn't something our parents bought new. It looked like it had been handed down or salvaged from an estate sale. I never liked that mirror. Even as a kid, I had this uncomfortable feeling whenever I looked into it. It was as if the reflection didn't match the room perfectly, like the mirror was showing something else, just out of sync. Sometimes I caught flickers of movement behind me in the glass. When I'd spin around, no one was ever there. One night, when I was about 11, I woke up in the middle of the night needing to use the bathroom. It was pitch black outside the bathroom door, and the house was silent except for the old creaks you expect from wooden floors settling. The only light was the faint glow of the street lamp outside filtering through the window. I was half asleep and tried not to think too much about the mirror. I washed my hands and glanced up, and there he was. A man standing behind me in the mirror. Not in the bathroom itself, just in the reflection. He was tall and thin, wearing an old-fashioned coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled down low so I couldn't see his eyes. His face was pale and expressionless, like a statue carved from marble. I froze, unable to move or even breathe. For what felt like minutes, he just stood there. Then he lifted one hand and gently tapped the glass. I jerked awake, turned around. Nothing. I looked back. He was gone. For weeks after that, I avoided using the bathroom at night. I didn't tell anyone because I thought they'd laugh or say I was dreaming. But the feeling of being watched never went away. Then one day my sister came to me with wide eyes. "I saw him too," she whispered. Turns out she'd been seeing the man in the mirror for weeks but was too scared to tell me. After that, we both started looking for answers. We asked our parents about the mirror, but they only said it was old and had been in the family forever. No one wanted to talk about where it really came from. So I started digging on my own. I discovered that the mirror was originally from a Victorian mansion that burned down in our town almost 100 years ago. The owner was a recluse named Edgar Holloway, who vanished the night the fire started. The locals said he was obsessed with mirrors and reflections, believed they held the souls of those trapped between worlds. One story claimed that before the fire, Edgar had built a hidden room lined with mirrors where he spent hours staring into his own reflection, trying to see something beyond. I got chills reading that. One afternoon, my sister and I decided to try an experiment. We sat in front of the mirror trying to will the man to appear again. We whispered his name, asked questions, and waited. Hours passed, and at first nothing. Then the temperature in the bathroom dropped suddenly, our breath visible in the cold air. The light bulb flickered violently, then went out. In the pitch black, the man's face appeared in the mirror's surface, a ghostly pale visage, eyes glowing faintly red. He whispered, but it wasn't words, more like a soundless scream inside our heads. We bolted from the bathroom, never returning. I begged my parents to remove the mirror, but they said it was a family heirloom and refused. Eventually, I snuck out one night and took the mirror to a scrapyard several towns away. I watched as the workers smashed it into shards. I thought that was the end. But sometimes late at night, I still catch a glimpse of that man in reflections. Car windows, spoons, even the screen of my phone. And every time I hear the same silent whisper, "Don't forget me." A few years ago, I got a job working as a night security guard at an old hotel downtown. It was the kind of place that had seen better days. Faded wallpaper, creaky floors, and a long history that nobody really talked about. The kind of place with rumors whispered by the staff about guests who never checked out. The job was mostly boring. Patrol the halls, check the cameras, answer the occasional phone call. But there was one part of the hotel I was told never to go into. The East Wing, specifically the third floor. The management called it off-limits for maintenance reasons, but there was an unspoken fear about that area. Most of the staff just ignored it. On my first night, I found out why. At around 2 a.m., I was doing my usual rounds when I noticed a faint light coming from the end of the East Wing hallway. The doors on that floor were supposed to be locked, but one was cracked open, and soft music was leaking out. Not the kind you'd expect. More like an old-fashioned lullaby playing on a broken record player. Curious, I approached carefully. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a room bathed in a pale yellow light. Inside, I saw a single chair facing away from the door, rocking slowly back and forth. No one was sitting in it. I stepped inside and the music stopped. The room was empty except for the chair. The wallpaper was peeling and the carpet was threadbare. On the wall, there was a large mirror cracked in half. As I turned to leave, I caught movement in the mirror's reflection. There was a little girl standing behind me. She wore a faded white dress and had tangled hair that covered her face. When I spun around, she was gone. My heart was pounding as I backed out of the room and closed the door. I tried to shake it off as a trick of the light or my imagination. But every night after that, the same thing happened. I'd hear the lullaby playing from that room. The chair would rock by itself, and sometimes I'd see the girl's shadow flickering in the hallways. One night I found a journal tucked behind the radiator in the lobby. It belonged to a former maid who worked at the hotel decades ago. She wrote about a child who had disappeared from the East Wing, a girl named Clara. She described strange noises, whispers, and sightings of a rocking chair that moved on its own. The last entry was chilling. "I'm scared for Clara. She's trapped somewhere, waiting. I think the hotel doesn't want us to find her." Determined, I told my manager about the journal and asked for permission to check the East Wing. He hesitated, but eventually gave me a set of keys. That night, I went back to the room. The door was unlocked. Inside, the chair was still rocking. I sat down and the air turned icy cold. The mirror on the wall suddenly cracked wider, and I saw Clara's face staring back at me, eyes wide with fear and pleading. I ran. I never went back. A few years ago, I took a job working the overnight shift at a customer service call center. The work itself was mind-numbing, answering repetitive questions, transferring calls, and listening to tired or angry people who'd been on hold too long. But the graveyard shift had one advantage. It was quiet, and there was little supervision, which gave me some breathing room. One night around 3 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown number. I answered, expecting another angry customer or wrong number. But all I heard was heavy breathing. It was slow, deep, and deliberate, almost like someone was holding their breath close to the receiver. "Hello?" I said, voice flat. "Can I help you?" No response. I waited, the breathing continuing for nearly a minute. Then the line went dead. I shrugged it off, assuming a prank call or a wrong number. But the calls kept coming. Night after night, at the exact same time, the phone would ring with the same unknown number and the same heavy breathing. No words, no background noise, just the slow, deliberate breaths. After a few nights, I started to dread that call. It was like a cold weight settling over me, a quiet menace. Then on the fourth night, the breathing changed. It became accompanied by faint whispers, words I couldn't quite make out. I strained to hear through the static until one word broke through clearly. "Help." I told my manager about the calls, but he just laughed and told me it was probably a prank. That didn't help me feel any better. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I stayed on the line longer during the next call. "If you need help, say something," I whispered. After what felt like an eternity, a soft voice replied, barely audible but unmistakable. "I'm trapped." My heart skipped a beat. "Trapped? Where are you?" Silence. Then the line went dead. I couldn't stop thinking about it the next day. I had to find out who was calling me. I enlisted the IT department to trace the number. It took some work, but they finally tracked it to an address on the outskirts of town, an old building abandoned for years. A place burned down in a fire almost a decade earlier. The fire had been devastating, with one occupant reported missing, presumed dead. The police were skeptical when I told them about the calls, but agreed to check out the site. The building was nothing but ruins. Charred wood, melted wiring, and collapsed walls. No sign of anyone alive. Weeks passed with no more calls. I thought it was over. Until one night a final call came through. The line was silent at first. Then a whisper. "Thank you." And then the line disconnected. I never worked the graveyard shift again. But sometimes, late at night, when the phone rings and I see unknown number, I don't answer. A few years ago, I moved into a small suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knows your name, but no one really knows everything about you. Quiet streets, neat lawns, and a calm that almost felt unnatural. There was one house on my street that always gave me an uneasy feeling. It sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, an old Victorian with cracked windows, peeling paint, and an overgrown yard choked by weeds and twisted vines. No cars ever parked there, and the curtains were always drawn tight, even in the daytime. Neighbors would avoid the subject when I asked about the place. Some said it had been vacant for years. Others whispered that the last owner had vanished under mysterious circumstances. No one seemed to want to talk about it openly. For the first few weeks, I paid little attention, but then things started to happen. Late at night, I'd hear noises, soft footsteps pacing inside that house, creaks and groans that didn't match the usual settling of an old building. Sometimes faint whispers drifted through the air, just loud enough to make me stop in my tracks. One cold autumn evening, I was walking my dog past the house. As we passed, a dim light flickered on in one of the upstairs windows. I stopped and stared, heart racing. The window was cracked open, and I thought I saw a figure standing just inside, watching. The light went out suddenly. The figure disappeared. I felt my skin crawl. That night the noises came again, footsteps pacing slowly from room to room. I lay awake, listening to the house breathe around me. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. The front door of the house was unlocked. The knob turned easily. I stepped inside and the air hit me like a wave, stale, cold, and heavy with dust. The house was empty. Not just unfurnished, completely abandoned. No furniture, no personal effects, just layers of dust and shadows. As I moved through the rooms, I found something strange. On the walls of the living room were dozens of photographs taped haphazardly, faces scratched out with furious, angry strokes. Family photos, birthdays, vacations. But every face was obliterated. I felt a chill deep in my bones. On the kitchen table, I found an old diary, the leather cover cracked and fragile. The pages were brittle but still readable. The diary belonged to the previous occupant, a woman named Margaret. Her entries began normal enough but quickly spiraled into paranoia. She wrote about feeling watched, hearing whispers in the walls, and shadows that moved just out of sight. One entry stood out. I know he's here, watching me, through the windows, through the walls. I don't know who he is, but he's waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to disappear. I read on, the words becoming more desperate and fragmented. The last entry was chilling. He's not a man, not anymore. He watches, but he doesn't live. I can't stay. I have to leave before he finds me, before he takes me. I closed the diary and turned to leave. At the front door, I paused and glanced back toward the living room. A shadow moved behind the cracked window panes. Not a trick of the light. Someone was still inside. I didn't stop to find out who. A couple years ago, I moved into a small rental house just outside of town. The kind of place that felt cozy from the outside but had a history nobody wanted to talk about. The previous tenants left suddenly, and the landlord seemed hesitant when I asked about them, just telling me it was a quiet neighborhood and everything was fine. The house was old, with wooden floors that creaked underfoot and walls that seemed too thin. I thought it was normal until the strange noises started. The first night I heard whispering, not outside but inside the walls. Faint voices, almost too soft to catch. I told myself it was the house settling or maybe neighbors talking, but the sounds were inside the walls. The whispers sounded like they were coming from all directions, swirling around me in the quiet. I tried to ignore it. Over the next few days, the whispers got louder and more distinct. I could hear fragments of words, sometimes my name, sometimes pleas for help, sometimes unintelligible murmurs that sent chills down my spine. One night, the whispers turned into voices arguing. I stood frozen, listening as two voices fought in a language I didn't understand. Harsh, urgent, and full of anger. The walls seemed to pulse with their rage. I started keeping a recorder running overnight, hoping to catch something concrete. When I played it back the next day, the whispers were there, clear as day, but slowed down. They sounded like a warning. "Leave before he finds you." I laughed nervously. "It's just my imagination," I told myself. But the unease stayed. Then came the scratching. At first it was soft, like nails dragged lightly across wood. But each night it got louder, closer. One evening I pressed my ear against the wall and could swear I heard breathing. Desperate, I called the landlord and asked for the history of the place. He hesitated, then told me a story. Years ago, a man had lived there alone. People said he was a recluse, rarely seen, and strange things happened. Disappearances, odd noises, and whispers that neighbors heard at night. When the man died, no one wanted the house. It stayed empty for years until someone else moved in, but they left abruptly after just a few weeks. I asked if he'd ever investigated. He said no, just let people leave on their own. The night after our conversation, the whispers grew into frantic screams. The walls seemed to shake. I could feel cold air rushing through the house, even with all the windows shut. I packed a bag and left before dawn. That was 6 months ago. I haven't been back. Sometimes late at night, I swear I hear whispering on the phone line, but when I pick up, there's only silence. About 4 years ago, my group of friends and I decided to escape the noise of city life and spend a weekend in a remote cabin deep in the woods. We wanted to disconnect from everything. No phones, no internet. Just the raw experience of nature and each other. We'd been planning it for months, and when the day finally came, we piled into 2 cars and drove until the pavement ended. The road to the cabin was a narrow dirt path swallowed by towering pines. Every few feet, twisted roots broke through the ground like veins. The air was thick with the scent of moss and wet earth. We joked and sang along to music to shake off the unease settling in my chest. When we arrived, the cabin looked like something out of a storybook, worn but solid, nestled between thick trees, with a stone chimney puffing wisps of smoke. The porch creaked beneath our feet as we unloaded. No electricity, just a propane stove and lanterns. The first night, we built a fire outside, sitting in a circle and telling ghost stories. The flames cast dancing shadows on the trees, and the woods around us felt alive, watching. But as the fire dwindled, the forest fell deathly silent. No crickets, no rustling animals. Just an unnatural stillness that gnawed at my nerves. When I excused myself to use the cabin's bathroom, I caught movement in the mirror. A figure standing just behind me watching. I whipped around, heart pounding, but the small space was empty. "Did you see that?" I asked, voice shaky. "No," my friend Lisa said, brushing it off. "You're just tired." I wanted to believe her, but that night sleep was impossible. The next morning, Mark was missing. We split up to search, calling his name into the woods. The trees swallowed our voices, and the sunlight filtered in strange patterns. No footprints, no signs. It was like he vanished. By nightfall, panic set in. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere shifted. Doors we'd locked opened slowly on their own. Whispering voices floated through the rooms, calling our names softly but urgently. We huddled together, trying to keep calm. Our cars refused to start, as if the forest itself was holding us captive. Over the next 2 days, the cabin seemed to change. Shadows flickered just beyond the corner of our eyes. Objects disappeared, then reappeared in odd places. The temperature plummeted, and a thick fog rolled in, turning the trees into looming silhouettes. Late one night, I found a hidden drawer in the kitchen table. Inside were old journals, yellowed pages filled with frantic handwriting. They belonged to past residents who wrote about a dark presence in the woods, something ancient and hungry, feeding on fear and trapping souls in endless torment. On our final night, the whispers became unbearable. A cold wind howled through the cracks, carrying voices that begged for release. Suddenly, the door burst open. Mark stumbled in, disheveled, wild-eyed, clothes torn and soaked. He claimed he had been wandering for days, but our watches showed only hours had passed. Mark was different after that night. He muttered to himself, spoke in strange voices, eyes always darting to shadows. We left the cabin at first light and never returned, but sometimes late at night, when I'm alone, I swear I hear whispers on the wind, and I wonder if the woods will come for me next. It started during the winter of 2019 in a small town that I had recently moved to for work. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone's business, but the streets are quiet after dark. I rented a small house on the outskirts, old but cozy, with creaky floors and drafty windows. Nothing about it seemed unusual, at least at first. The first night I stayed alone, I heard knocking. It was faint. Soft raps at the front door around midnight. I thought maybe it was one of my neighbors or a stray animal, so I ignored it. But the knocking kept coming, steady and slow, like someone trying not to make noise but unable to stop. Curious and a little unnerved, I peeked through the peephole. No one, just darkness. I opened the door a crack, but no one was there. The porch was empty, the cold wind rattling the old wooden steps. Shrugging, I closed the door and tried to go back to sleep. But then the knocking returned, this time from the back door. I was starting to feel something wasn't right. The next few nights, the knocking continued. Sometimes at the front door, sometimes the back. Always at midnight, always the same slow rhythm. One night, I set up my phone to record audio while I slept. The next day, I listened back. Amid the silence, I could hear whispers, soft, pleading voices murmuring my name. I showed the recording to a friend, and she suggested it might be spirits trying to communicate. I laughed it off, but inside I was growing anxious. On the fourth night, I was jolted awake by a loud crash downstairs. Heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the living room. The window was shattered, glass glittering on the floor like stars. But still no sign of anyone. Over the next week, strange things escalated. Lights flickered without cause. Cold spots appeared in random places. Icy fingers brushing against my skin. Objects moved on their own. Doors that were locked swung open, chairs tipped over. And always the knocking at midnight. One evening, I found a small old diary tucked behind a loose brick in the fireplace. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with entries from decades ago. The writer spoke of a visitor who came at night, a shadowy figure who knocked on the doors, whispered secrets, and demanded attention. One entry stopped me cold. He waits for the one who hears the knocking. When they answer, he will come inside, and they will never be alone again. That night I stayed up, determined to catch the visitor. As the clock struck midnight, the knocking started again, soft, deliberate. I held my breath and slowly opened the front door. The porch was empty, but as I stepped outside, I felt a cold breath on my neck. I turned around him and saw nothing but shadows. Then from the corner of my eye, a figure appeared. A tall, dark silhouette, barely visible but unmistakably there. I slammed the door shut, heart racing, and locked every lock. For nights after, I kept hearing footsteps on the porch, knocking on the doors, whispering my name. I moved out as soon as I could. But sometimes when I'm alone late at night, I swear I still hear that slow, steady knocking. And I wonder if the visitor ever left. It began when I inherited my grandfather's old farmhouse out in the countryside. The place was called Hollow Hill, named for the way the wind howled through the surrounding woods, sounding like whispers carried from another world. I hadn't been there since I was a kid, but after he passed, it felt like the right time to claim it and maybe start fresh. The house was ancient, weathered wood, sagging porch, windows clouded with dust and age. It sat atop a small hill surrounded by dense forest on all sides. The locals avoided it, calling it cursed or haunted, but I figured those were just stories. The first few days were peaceful. I spent time cleaning, fixing broken boards, and exploring the property. But from the moment I arrived, there was a feeling in the air, like the house was watching me, waiting. The first night I barely slept. The wind whispered through the cracks, making the old floorboards creak and groan. Somewhere deep in the house, I heard soft footsteps, slow and deliberate. But when I checked, there was no one. The second night, it got worse. I woke to a low guttural moan echoing through the hallway. The lights flickered. Shadows danced just beyond the edge of my vision. I told myself it was just the old house settling, nerves playing tricks. But on the third night, I found a hidden door in the basement, a narrow, rotting staircase leading down into darkness. I never knew that part of the house existed. Against my better judgment, I descended. The air grew colder, thick with dust and something else, something metallic. At the bottom, I found a small underground room with walls covered in strange symbols, carved deep into the stone. In the center was an altar, stained dark with what looked like dried blood. My skin crawled as I realized this was no ordinary farmhouse. The next morning I tried to leave, but the car wouldn't start. Trapped. That night the whispers turned to voices, murmuring my name, begging, threatening. Doors slammed shut on their own. Windows rattled like someone was pounding from the outside. In the mirror I saw faces, twisted, desperate, trapped behind the glass. I started keeping a journal, documenting every strange occurrence. Footsteps in empty rooms, objects moving, cold spots, and the ever-present feeling of being watched. One entry described waking up to find deep scratches on my arms, though I hadn't felt a thing. The days blurred together. I realized the house was alive, feeding on fear, trapping souls to keep itself strong. On the seventh night, I found a letter hidden beneath a loose floorboard. It was from my grandfather. He warned me to leave, saying the house had claimed too many. That night I saw it. A figure, tall, gaunt, eyes glowing red, standing at the foot of my bed. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. When morning came, it was gone. I packed what I could and fled Hollow Hill. But the house isn't done with me. Sometimes late at night I hear the whispers again, and I fear that one day it will call me back. A couple of years ago, I took a job as a night security guard at an abandoned hospital on the edge of town. The place had been shut down for decades after a series of mysterious incidents that no one wanted to talk about. When I was hired, I thought it'd be a simple job. Patrol the hallways, check the locks, and make sure no trespassers caused trouble. But it quickly turned into something else entirely. The hospital was huge. Old brick building with peeling paint, rusted metal doors, and broken windows boarded up with thick plywood. Inside, the smell of mildew and decay was overwhelming. It felt like the walls themselves were soaked in history, and something darker. On my first night, I did my rounds. The building was silent except for the occasional drip of water echoing through the empty corridors. I passed the old patient rooms, their doors hanging open, long-forgotten beds covered in dust. The flickering lights overhead cast eerie shadows that seemed to move just beyond the edge of vision. About halfway through my shift, I heard faint sounds, a soft humming coming from one of the old therapy rooms. I checked the security cameras, but there was nothing there, just empty hallways. I shrugged it off. But the noises got worse. Soft footsteps in places where no one could be. Doors creaking open and shut. Whispering voices calling out unintelligible words. One night I found a journal tucked behind the nurse's station. It belonged to a nurse who worked there before the hospital closed. She wrote about strange patients who appeared suddenly, claiming to hear voices and see figures in the shadows. She described the dark man, a shadowy presence that moved silently through the halls, watching and waiting. The nurse's last entry was frantic. "He's coming for me. I don't know how to stop it." On the third week, things escalated. I started seeing shadows, dark shapes darting just outside my vision. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of a tall figure with no face, standing silently at the end of hallways. One night, the emergency alarms blared unexpectedly. I ran to the source, only to find empty rooms and silent corridors. The hospital seemed to breathe, the air thickening, pulsing with unseen energy. I wanted to quit, but something kept me there. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe the hospital had marked me. On my final night, I was doing my rounds when the lights went out completely. The building plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of emergency exit signs. I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I turned but saw nothing. Suddenly, a cold hand gripped my shoulder. I spun around to face empty air. A voice whispered in my ear, "You can't leave." I ran out of that place and never looked back. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I hear footsteps echoing behind me. And I wonder if the forgotten hospital still remembers me. A few years ago, I took a summer job as a lighthouse keeper on a remote island off the northern coast. The island was tiny, barely a speck on the map, surrounded by crashing waves and jagged rocks. The lighthouse itself was ancient, built in the 1800s, weathered by salt and storm. For me, it was a dream job, isolation, the sea, and a chance to escape city life. But what I found there was far from peaceful. The island had a reputation locally. Fishermen told stories of ships that vanished without a trace, strange lights seen flickering beneath the waves, and a mysterious figure who once kept the light, a man who disappeared decades ago, never to be seen again. When I arrived, the lighthouse was cold and creaky, the walls lined with peeling paint and rusty fixtures. I was told I'd be alone most of the time, with supplies dropped every few days by boat. The first few nights were quiet, almost idyllic. The only sounds were the waves pounding the rocks and the steady turning of the light. But soon strange things began. At first it was small, tools misplaced, strange scratching noises in the walls, the radio crackling with static and faint whispers. One night I heard footsteps on the spiral stairs, slow, deliberate, but when I checked, I was alone. I chalked it up to nerves. Then came the dreams. Each night I dreamt of the previous keeper, a gaunt man with hollow eyes who stared out to sea, muttering about the darkness beneath. He warned me not to trust the light. I began to feel watched. Sometimes late at night I'd see a figure standing at the base of the lighthouse, staring up at me, silent, unmoving, vanishing when I blinked. One morning I found strange symbols carved into the door frames, symbols I hadn't noticed before. I tried researching the island's history and found that the previous keeper had gone mad, disappearing under mysterious circumstances. Locals believed the island was cursed by something ancient living beneath the waves. The final night was the worst. The storm came suddenly, wind howling, rain lashing, waves crashing higher than ever. The light flickered and died. I was plunged into darkness. Then I heard it, a low guttural chanting rising from the ocean. I ran outside, battling the wind. The figure appeared again, but this time it was different, translucent, glowing faintly. It raised a hand and the sea roiled violently. The ground beneath me shook. I barely made it back inside. The storm lasted all night. When dawn broke, the lighthouse stood silent. I packed my things and left the island for good. But sometimes when I'm near the ocean, I swear I can hear that chanting and see the faint glow of the lighthouse light shining far out at sea. A couple of years ago, I was driving cross-country for work, taking the scenic route through small towns and back roads to avoid the highways. It was late afternoon when I approached a tiny town called Harrowsville, a place I'd never heard of before. My car was low on gas, and the GPS signal flickered and died just as I neared the outskirts. Since the sun was setting, I figured I'd stop for a quick fill-up, stretch my legs, and maybe grab a bite to eat. But as I pulled into Harrowsville, something felt immediately wrong. The streets were completely deserted. No people walking around, no parked cars, no sign of any life. The kind of silence that presses down on you, heavy and unnatural. It was so quiet, in fact, that I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. The gas station was old, with a flickering neon sign that buzzed weakly, casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. The door was locked tight. I knocked a few times, calling inside, but no one answered. The inside was pitch black. I wandered down the main street, peering into shuttered shops with dusty windows. There were no sounds, not even the usual creak of old wood settling or the chirp of crickets as dusk approached. Just silence. I tried to get a signal on my phone, but it was dead. No bars, no connection. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. I stepped back toward my car, feeling the hairs on my neck stand on end. Then I heard it, a faint echo of footsteps coming from an alley nearby. Slow, deliberate, but no one appeared when I looked. Trying to shake off the growing unease, I decided to walk toward the town square. Maybe I'd find a diner, a cafe, or some other sign of life. The buildings lining the street were old but well-maintained. Oddly, the streets themselves were swept clean, almost as if someone had been caring for them recently. The air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke, but no chimneys were lit. Ahead I saw a small church, its wooden doors cracked open just a little. Cautiously, I pushed one side wider and stepped inside. The church was empty, rows of dusty pews, faded hymnals scattered across the floor. Yet on the altar lay a fresh bouquet of wildflowers, their colors vivid and alive. How could that be, if no one was here? As I moved toward the altar, a soft creak echoed from the balcony above. I looked up and caught a flicker of movement, a shadow disappearing behind a stained glass window. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Silence. The temperature dropped suddenly, cold air washing over me like a breath from the grave. A whisper floated just beyond hearing, a soft, urgent sigh that seemed to say my name. Heart racing, I hurried back outside. The sun had almost vanished completely, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. I tried the car again. No luck. The engine sputtered but wouldn't turn over. My unease turned to outright fear. I felt eyes on me, watching from every corner. I scanned the empty streets, half expecting to see a figure step out of the darkness. Then I heard it. Distant chanting, faint and rhythmic, carried on the cold night air. I traced the sound toward the edge of town, where the street ended and dense woods began. The forest swallowed me as I stepped beneath the ancient trees. The chanting grew louder, a low hypnotic hum that wrapped around me like a cold fog. I found myself in a clearing illuminated by moonlight filtering through the canopy. There, dozens of figures stood in a circle, draped in dark cloaks with their faces hidden beneath deep hoods. Their bodies swayed gently in unison, moving to the rhythm of the chant. In the center of the circle was a stone altar stained dark with dried ancient marks. I froze, heart hammering. One figure turned sharply toward me. The chanting stopped. A chilling silence fell like a heavy blanket. Then a voice, low and hollow, whispered, "You should not be here." Panic surged through me. I stumbled backward, branches tearing at my clothes and skin as I fled through the woods. The chanting began again behind me, growing louder, more insistent. I didn't dare look back. When I burst out of the trees and onto the empty road, the town was gone. Only endless fields stretched to the horizon beneath a sky heavy with stars. I never found Harrowsville on any map or in any directory. Sometimes when I'm driving late at night, I swear I hear the chanting carried on the wind. And I wonder if the silent town is still waiting, hidden in the shadows, for its next visitor. About 5 years ago, I decided to take a solo hiking trip deep into the mountains. I was desperate to escape the relentless noise and chaos of city life, to find solitude and quiet among the trees and trails. My plan was simple: hike into a remote area, set up camp, and spend a few days disconnected from everything. The first day went smoothly. The forest was dense but beautiful, towering pines, moss-covered rocks, and sunlight filtering through the canopy. But on the second day, after hours of trekking along a barely marked trail, the weather began to change. Thick fog rolled in, blanketing the woods in a ghostly white that swallowed the landscape. As I pushed through the mist, I stumbled upon an old cabin nestled in a small clearing. It looked abandoned, the wooden walls darkened and warped by years of rain, the roof sagging under the weight of moss and debris. The windows were grimy and cracked, and the porch sagged with each creaking step. Despite its decay, something about the cabin drew me in, a silent invitation amid the swirling fog. I decided to make camp there instead of pitching my tent. The thought of a solid roof felt safer, especially with the fog so thick I could barely see a few feet ahead. Stepping inside, the air hit me cold and stale, heavy with the scent of damp wood and something faintly metallic, like old blood. The room was sparse, a rough-hewn table covered in dust, chairs draped with tattered sheets, and a fireplace filled with cold gray ashes. A cracked mirror hung crookedly on the far wall, its surface mottled with age and reflecting the dim glow of my lantern in fractured shards. As night fell, the forest outside fell eerily silent. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, just a heavy, suffocating stillness that pressed in on the cabin like a living thing. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a faint tapping noise. At first, I thought it was just the wind rattling the old wooden walls, but then I realized the taps followed a slow, deliberate rhythm, like someone knocking. Heart pounding, I grabbed my flashlight and trained it on the window facing the dark woods. The fog outside swirled in thick, ghostly shapes, dancing just beyond the glass. Suddenly, a shadow flickered past, a brief, dark figure moving just out of reach. I froze, breath caught in my throat. The tapping grew louder, more urgent. Then, barely audible, came a whisper, soft, breathy, and unmistakably my name. I told myself it was my imagination, nerves playing tricks after a long day alone. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The night stretched on, each minute heavier than the last. Footsteps circled the cabin, soft but relentless, never getting closer but never fading away. I peeked through the curtains, but all I saw was an impenetrable fog, swirling and shifting like smoke. As dawn finally broke, I stepped outside to find scraps of old newspapers scattered near the porch. The headlines were faded, but I made out words about a family who once lived in the cabin, a family that had vanished without explanation decades ago. Curiosity mingled with dread. That night the tapping returned, joined by faint mournful crying that seemed to come from deep within the fog-shrouded forest. The cabin felt alive, a trap, or maybe a beacon. I couldn't stay. At first light I packed my things and left, but as I walked away, I glanced back through the thick mist. There, just beyond the tree line, stood a pale figure, motionless and watching. Even now, whenever I'm alone in the dark, I hear that tapping in my mind, feel those cold eyes on me, and I wonder if the cabin still waits, patiently, silently, for me to return. A few years back, I decided to visit my grandparents' old farm in a small town called Mill Creek. The place was steeped in history, generations of family stories, some beautiful, some dark. My grandparents had passed away, and the farm had been left untouched for years. I wanted to clear it out, maybe sell it, but something made me want to spend a night there first. The farmhouse was a weathered two-story building, surrounded by overgrown fields and dense woods. The air was thick with the scent of earth and fading memories. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun dipping low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the porch. As I stepped inside, the floorboards groaned under my weight. Dust motes floated in the fading light, settling on old furniture and faded photographs. The house felt heavy, like it was holding its breath, waiting. That night, as I lay in one of the upstairs bedrooms, I heard strange noises, faint whispers, creaking doors, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps pacing the hall outside my room. I told myself it was the house settling, old wood reacting to the night's chill. But then came the voices, soft, urgent, overlapping echoes of the past. I heard laughter and crying, fragments of conversation in voices I didn't recognize. The next day I explored the property and found a small, abandoned well at the edge of the woods. The well was covered with rotting boards, but beneath I heard the faintest echo of something calling. That night the noises grew louder. The footsteps became pacing, circling the room. The whispers turned into words. "Come back. Don't forget." I tried to ignore it, but the house seemed alive, filled with restless spirits tethered to a tragic history. As the days passed, I uncovered old journals hidden in the attic, stories of my ancestors' struggles, secrets of lost lives, and a dark event that no one talked about. A fire that had taken a family member years ago, with whispers of something unnatural behind it. One stormy night the power went out, and the house plunged into darkness. The echoes became screams, desperate, haunting. I saw shadows moving in the corners of my eyes and felt cold hands brush against my skin. I realized the farm wasn't just memories. It was a prison. Trapped souls crying out for release. I left at dawn, but the echoes followed me. Even now, when the wind howls through the trees, I hear their voices calling. And I wonder if one day I'll have to return to face what's still waiting at Mill Creek. I took a temporary job working the night shift at an old textile factory called Coldwater. The place had been shut down for years, but recently a new company bought it and was testing equipment before a full reopening. I wasn't thrilled about working there. The factory had a reputation for strange accidents and unexplained noises, but I needed the money. The building was massive, long rows of rusted machinery, endless corridors filled with broken conveyor belts and shattered windows boarded up with plywood. The smell was a mix of oil, dust, and something metallic that made my stomach churn. My shift started at midnight, with just me and a skeleton crew of a few technicians. The others mostly stayed in the control room, but I had to patrol the vast factory floor alone. The first few hours were quiet, the only sound my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. But as the night deepened, I started hearing things. Distant banging, the creak of heavy machinery starting up by itself, and a low humming that seemed to come from nowhere. At one point, I passed an old loom that suddenly jerked to life, threads snapping and flying through the air, before shutting off just as quickly. My heart slammed against my ribs. I radioed the control room, but they said everything looked normal on the cameras. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. In the break room, I found old notes left by previous workers warning of the shadows, strange shapes seen moving in the dark, unexplained accidents, and voices calling from empty rooms. I laughed it off at first, but that night the shadows appeared. They flickered at the edge of my vision, dark formless figures that vanished when I turned to look. One night the power cut out completely. I was plunged into total darkness except for the faint glow of emergency lights. I heard footsteps all around me, circling, getting closer. A cold breath brushed past my neck. I ran to the exit, but the door was locked tight. No response on the radio. I was trapped. Suddenly, a figure stepped out of the shadows, tall, indistinct, with glowing eyes. Frozen with fear, I watched as it raised a hand. Then everything went black. I woke up hours later, outside the factory doors, with no memory of how I got there. I quit the next day, but sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I hear the factories hum and see those glowing eyes watching me. A few years ago, I was driving late one rainy night on a long, isolated highway that cut through thick forest and rolling hills. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, and the rain had been coming down steadily, turning the road slick and shiny under my headlights. I'd just finished visiting family several hours away and was eager to get home, tired but alert enough to keep my eyes on the road. As I rounded a curve near a stretch of dense woods, my headlights caught the figure of a young woman standing alone on the shoulder. She was soaked through from the rain, her dark hair plastered to her pale face, and her clothes clung to her thin frame like wet sheets. Her thumb was out, a silent plea for help in the middle of nowhere. I hesitated for a moment, the kind of hesitation born of late-night caution, but I pulled over and lowered the window. She climbed into the car wordlessly, settling into the passenger seat with a quiet grace, her eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the windshield. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said where she wanted to go. A small town name I didn't recognize. I nodded and started driving again, trying to break the silence with small talk. But she didn't respond, staring blankly ahead with a haunted look that made the hairs on my arms rise. Minutes passed, the rain drumming softly on the roof, and then I glanced over. The passenger seat was empty. My heart lurched. I slammed on the brakes, pulling to the side of the road. The rain was relentless, and the fog was thickening, turning the trees into shadowy shapes that pressed close to the road. I called her name, my voice cracking, but there was no reply. I stepped out into the cold, the rain soaking through my jacket instantly. I searched the shoulder, the ditch, the dark woods beyond. Nothing. No footprints, no sign she'd been there at all. The whole night after that, my mind raced with questions. The next day, I told the police what happened, describing the woman and the stretch of road where I'd picked her up. They listened carefully, then shared a local legend, the story of a vanishing hitchhiker. According to the tale, a young woman had died in a car accident decades ago on that very stretch of highway, waiting for a ride home she would never take. They warned me not to chase after ghosts, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. In the nights that followed, I found myself drawn back to the road. Each time the weather seemed to worsen, the fog thick and suffocating. Sometimes when I slowed down near the spot where I'd seen her, I thought I glimpsed a figure standing just at the edge of the trees, watching. One night as I drove slowly, the woman appeared again, clearer this time, her soaked hair shining in the dim light, eyes wide with sorrow. She spoke softly. "Please help me." Her voice was so fragile it felt like a breeze against my skin. I reached out instinctively, but my hand passed right through her like mist. She smiled, a sad, knowing smile, then faded into the swirling fog. After that, the road felt haunted. Headlights would flicker, shadows would dart at the edge of my vision, and sometimes I'd hear a faint sobbing carried on the wind. I don't know what she wants. All I know is she's still out there, waiting for a ride that never comes. A few years ago, I took a temporary job as the night auditor at an old historic hotel downtown, a grand building with an ornate facade, cracked marble floors, and an atmosphere thick with decades of stories, secrets, and shadows. I'd heard rumors about the hotel's most notorious room, Room 13. It was rarely booked, and the staff avoided it like the plague. Ghost stories swirled around it, tales of guests disappearing, strange noises, and an unsettling mirror that hung on its wall. Being a skeptic, I dismissed it all as local superstition and old folklore, but I was assigned to oversee Room 13 during a quiet week, and I planned to prove it was nothing but nonsense. The first night I entered Room 13, the air was noticeably colder, a chill that seemed to seep through the heavy curtains and into my bones. The room was elegantly furnished in Victorian style. Heavy wooden furniture, faded wallpaper patterned with creeping ivy, and a large ornate mirror hung on the wall opposite the bed. The mirror was the centerpiece, a massive frame carved with twisting vines and faces that seemed almost alive under the flickering candlelight. The glass itself wasn't perfectly clear. It shimmered faintly, like water rippling under a breeze. When I looked into it, I didn't just see my reflection. For a brief second, something else appeared behind me. A shadow, a movement, a pair of eyes. I spun around, but the room was empty. That night, as the clock struck 2, I was jolted awake by soft tapping sounds coming from Room 13 itself. I left the safety of the lobby and crept down the long, narrow corridor, my footsteps swallowed by the heavy silence. When I pushed open the door, the room was empty, but the mirror's surface seemed to ripple, distorting my reflection like a disturbed pond. A sudden cold breeze brushed past me, although all the windows were shut tight. Over the next few nights, the occurrences escalated. Shadows flickered in the corners of my vision, distant whispers echoed down the hallways, and the mirror reflected scenes that weren't present. Dark figures looming, faces twisted in silent agony, and flashes of a woman in an old-fashioned dress staring back at me with hollow eyes. One night, a guest who had booked Room 13 vanished. The door was locked from the inside, no signs of forced entry or exit. Staff found the mirror cracked down the middle, shards of glass scattered on the floor like ice. As the days wore on, the hotel itself seemed to warp around me. Hallways stretched endlessly, lights flickered erratically, and every time I looked into that mirror, I felt myself being pulled deeper, like it wanted to trap me in its dark reflection. I documented everything in a journal. My growing fear, the eerie atmosphere, the whispers that no one else seemed to hear. One terrifying night, trapped in a labyrinth of endless corridors, the mirror's surface began to pulse with a dark, almost hypnotic energy. Figures emerged from the glass, silent, shadowy forms reaching out with cold hands. I don't remember how I escaped, only that I ran until I burst through the hotel's front doors into the dawn's pale light. I quit the job the next day, leaving Room 13 and that cursed mirror behind. But sometimes when I catch my reflection in a window or a dark surface, I swear I see those hollow eyes watching me, waiting for me to return. A few years ago, I landed a temporary gig at a small local radio station tucked away in a quiet town. The station wasn't much, just a single room filled with old equipment, a few dusty vinyl records, and a microphone that looked like it belonged in the 1950s. My job was simple: host the late-night shift from midnight to 4 a.m., playing music, taking calls, and occasionally reading local news. The station had a reputation among the locals for being haunted, but I shrugged it off as small-town superstition. On my first night, everything was normal. The usual crackle of static, distant sounds from the street, the hum of the equipment. But just past 2 a.m., the power flickered and the lights dimmed. The static on the radio grew louder, forming strange, indecipherable noises. Then a voice came through, not over the phone, but directly through the microphone. It was faint at first, almost drowned out by static, but soon it became clear. A woman's voice whispering my name, calling for help. I thought it was a prank at first, someone messing with the station's equipment. But the voice grew desperate, telling a story of being trapped, lost somewhere dark and cold, begging for rescue. I tried calling out, but the only response was the eerie whisper echoing back. Over the next few nights, the broadcast took a darker turn. The voice revealed fragments of a tragic tale. A woman who disappeared years ago, her body never found, her spirit apparently trapped in the radio waves. Listeners began calling in, reporting strange noises and messages in the static. One night I caught a chilling message: "Find me before it's too late." Driven by fear and curiosity, I started digging into the station's history. I uncovered a story about a young woman who worked there decades earlier. A talented DJ who vanished without explanation after her final broadcast. Legend said her spirit was trapped inside the station, reaching out through the airwaves. One night during a fierce thunderstorm, the power went out completely. The only light was the faint glow from the radio console. The voice came back, louder and more urgent than ever. It pleaded for me to find her, to set her free. I followed a sudden impulse, racing to the old basement beneath the station. There I found a hidden room filled with broken equipment and a dusty reel-to-reel tape recorder. When I played the tape, the woman's voice filled the room, terrified, trapped, begging for release. Suddenly the tape stopped and silence fell. I felt a cold hand brush past me. Then the power surged back on. The next morning the station was silent. I never went back, but sometimes late at night when I'm alone, I still hear that voice faintly calling from the static, waiting. When I moved into apartment 9G, I was desperate. I'd just gone through a brutal breakup, lost my job, and had barely enough money to cover the deposit. The place was in an aging high-rise on the edge of the city, the kind of building that used to be luxury but had been forgotten over the decades. Most of the units were empty or filled with older tenants who rarely left their apartments. The rent was absurdly low for the area, but I wasn't about to ask questions. The first thing I noticed about the apartment was how quiet it was, unnaturally quiet. The moment I stepped inside, the sounds of the city seemed to vanish. No car horns, no footsteps in the hall, no voices through the walls. It was like I had stepped into a vacuum. The space itself was oddly shaped, long hallways, sharp corners, and a single narrow window in the living room that looked directly across into another apartment. 9H. That first night I remember waking around 3 a.m. disoriented. I thought I'd heard knocking, not on my door, but somewhere inside the apartment. I checked everything, windows, closets, even the cupboards. Nothing. But when I looked out the narrow window, I noticed a light on in the apartment across from me. 9H. The curtain was drawn slightly, just enough that I could make out the silhouette of someone standing completely still, facing my window. I stared for a long time, waiting for the figure to move, but it didn't. I assumed it was some weird sculpture or a trick of the light. Still, I closed the curtain and tried not to think about it. The next night, the same thing happened. I woke up at 3:04 a.m. feeling watched. I told myself it was anxiety. I'd been through a lot recently, but curiosity got the better of me. I peeked through the curtain. The figure was still there, exactly the same spot, same posture, same eerie stillness. Only this time the light in the apartment was off. The only illumination came from the moonlight, yet I could still see the figure. Now just a dark mass, unmistakably human, but wrong somehow. Too rigid, too tall. That was when I noticed something else. 9H had no lights on during the day. None. Ever. I never saw anyone come or go. I even asked my neighbor, an elderly woman named Ruth from 9F, if she knew who lived there. She hesitated before saying, "That apartment's been empty for years, dear. No one's been in there since the fire." I blinked. "Fire?" She nodded, her lips pressed tight. "Long time ago. Family died. Never found the body of the father." I pressed for more details, but she wouldn't say another word. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m. the air turned cold. My breath misted in front of me, even though the heat was running. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the curtain, and then I heard it. A soft scraping sound from the window. I inched over and slowly pulled the curtain aside. The figure was gone. Instead, in the condensation on the outside of the glass, a message had been written. in long, uneven letters, almost as if clawed. "I see you." I staggered backward, heart racing. I called the building's front desk, but no one answered. I called the police. They came, did a sweep, and found nothing. "Maybe it was a prank," one officer said. "Maybe condensation just looked like words." But I knew better. From that point on, things escalated. Lights in my apartment flickered at exactly 3:04 a.m. every night. My electronics would turn on by themselves, TVs, radios, even my phone. Once I heard my own voice coming from the speaker, something I'd never recorded. But it wasn't just the tech. The apartment itself began to change. My hallway seemed longer at night, the walls narrower. The corners of the rooms appeared darker than they should be, no matter how much light I turned on. And I began seeing reflections in mirrors, dark glass, even puddles, of someone standing behind me. But every time I turned around, nothing. Then came the dreams. I began having the same one every night. I was standing in the apartment across the hall, in 9H. It was blackened and burned, soot clinging to the walls. In the dream, I walked slowly toward the back room, heart pounding, only to find a mirror. In it was not my reflection, but the same figure I'd seen from my window. A man. Tall, too tall. His face featureless, like a wax figure melting. Just the faint outline of a mouth, open wide in an endless scream. He never moved. Until the last night. That night in the dream, he stepped out of the mirror. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. And there, across the room, standing in the corner, was the figure. Not a dream. Not a shadow. He was in my apartment. I didn't sleep again. I stayed in a hotel the next night. And the next. I tried to end my lease, but the landlord refused. He said I'd signed a year and there were penalties. He also insisted there was no apartment 9H anymore. That part of the building had been sealed off. When I returned with a maintenance worker to prove it existed, we found a brick wall where the hallway should have been. But I still have the photos. From that first night, showing 9H's window and the light and the figure. Even now, years later, I see him sometimes, standing across the street, on late-night security cams, in reflections. He watches me. And the worst part, every clock in my apartment, digital, analog, even the microwave, now freezes at exactly 3:04 a.m. every night. It started with a photograph. I was helping my aunt clean out my late uncle's farmhouse when I found it. A small black and white photo curled at the edges, tucked inside an old book in the attic. The photo showed a well sitting in the middle of an open clearing. It wasn't remarkable at first glance, stone-lined, partially sunken, the kind you'd expect in a place that predated plumbing. But the figure beside it, that's what caught me. A man, tall, standing slightly too stiff, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned coat. His face was off, blurred even though the rest of the photo was sharp, as if his features refused to be captured. When I asked my aunt about it, she paled. "Burn that," she said. "Forget you ever saw it." Of course I didn't. I'm not the forget-it-and-move-on type. I've always been the kind of person who digs into mysteries like this, especially the ones I'm warned to leave alone. So I didn't burn the photo. I scanned it, zoomed in, studied it. What I didn't expect was that every time I looked at it, it changed. Tiny things at first. The angle of the man's head, the depth of the shadows. One time I was sure the well's stonework had cracks that hadn't been there before. And then the man's position shifted, just a little, from standing beside the well to standing behind it. A day later he was leaning into it, and then one morning he was gone. That's when things started happening in real life. It began with dreams, vivid, unsettling. I'd be walking through a fog-covered forest at night, guided only by the sound of dripping water. I'd hear something echoing, distant, wet breathing. Then I'd come upon a clearing. The well would be there, and I'd wake just before seeing what was inside, always at 3:17 a.m. Exactly. For a week this continued. The dreams became more immersive. In one, I reached the edge of the well and peered down into the dark, and just before waking I saw something start to crawl up the inside. Pale hands gripping slick stone, nails torn and raw. The next day I found scratches under my bed, deep gouges, like someone had been hiding under there. I live alone. That night I fell asleep with every light in the house on. I dreamed again, but this time I wasn't in the forest. I was in my own house. The lights were off. Something was dripping in the kitchen, and the door to the basement was wide open. In the dream I walked toward it step by hesitant step. The light switch wouldn't work. The sound of dripping became louder, more erratic, wet, close. I reached the door frame, and even though it was pitch black down there, I could make out something. Moving. A figure at the bottom of the stairs. Then I heard it speak, in a voice that sounded like it was being pushed through water. "You saw me." I woke up gasping, heart pounding, shirt soaked with sweat. The clock read 3:17 a.m. The next day I went back to my aunt's house. I told her everything. She didn't seem surprised. She just stared at me with this hollow look and said, "That well shouldn't exist anymore. We buried it." "Where?" I asked, and she was quiet for a long time. "Behind the barn, but don't go there." I didn't listen. I returned to the farmhouse alone the next morning and walked past the overgrown garden, past the dilapidated barn, and into the dense tree line behind it. After an hour of pushing through brambles and ankle-deep mud, I found it, a collapsed ring of moss-covered stones barely visible beneath a tangle of vines. It was the well from the photo. Even though it had been filled in, I swear I could hear something inside it. A soft, wet scraping, like something shifting against the stone walls. Breathing. Faint, but real. I backed away, but from that point on, things spiraled. Back home, I started seeing things. Reflections in the corner of my eye. Shadows that would vanish when I turned. One time I found muddy footprints leading from my front door to my bedroom. I live on the 3rd floor. There are no stairs outside that window. I stopped sleeping. I kept the photo locked in a box, but every morning it was somewhere new. On my kitchen counter, inside my fridge, once even inside my pillowcase. And each time the man was back in the photo. Closer. Each day closer. Sometimes just his face, always blurred. Sometimes with his hand reaching toward the camera. The last time I looked, his face had sharpened, just enough. I recognized the background behind him. It was my apartment. I started hearing water, not from the pipes, from the walls, dripping, gurgling, flowing. Sometimes I'd wake up to find the floor wet beneath my bed. I'd mop it up, only for it to return the next day. I brought in a plumber, no leaks, an electrician, no issues, a priest. He refused to go near the photo, told me something had attached itself. That night I dreamed again. I was back in the forest, standing at the well. Except now I wasn't alone. The man was there, no longer shadowy or blurry. His face was pale and stretched, eyes sunken deep and black. His mouth hung open wider than it should have, unnaturally wide, as if it had been broken. And from that gaping mouth came a voice I can't forget. I was left here, forgotten. Now you remember, so I will come through you. I woke to find my fingernails black with dirt, my feet caked with mud. I tried destroying the photo, burned it. The flames wouldn't catch. I buried it in concrete. The next day it was on my kitchen table, perfectly clean. Every night the dreams returned. Every night the voice came closer. The last straw was when I found the well, in my bathroom. I'm not exaggerating. It wasn't literal, but the tile had cracked in a perfect circle, and in the middle a deep, wet hole. It hadn't been there before. I moved, changed my name, left everything behind. But the photo came with me, Now wherever I go, the photo finds its way back, and sometimes at 3:17 a.m. I hear water, scraping and breathing under my floor. I had just started a new job when I found the house. It was a temporary relocation. My company was sending me to a small town in Oregon for 6 months. The town was quiet, almost unsettlingly so. One main street, 2 traffic lights, and a diner that shut down at 8 p.m. sharp. I didn't know anyone. I didn't really want to. I was still reeling from a recent divorce, and honestly, the silence felt like a relief. So when I found the old house for rent just outside of town, tucked away behind a stretch of pine trees with no neighbors in sight, it felt like a perfect hideaway. The rent was suspiciously cheap, but I chalked it up to location and the fact that the place looked like it hadn't seen a coat of paint since the 70s. The key was left in the mailbox by the landlord, who I never met in person. I moved in on a rainy Friday evening, and by Saturday night, I was unpacked and half drunk, watching the wind knock branches against the window. That first night I heard something strange. I was lying in bed, not quite asleep, when I heard a sound from beneath the floorboards. Not the usual house-settling creaks or pipes. No, this was deliberate, rhythmic. Thud, thud, scrape. It came from directly under my bed. At first I laughed it off. An old house is bound to make noise. Maybe a raccoon had gotten into the crawl space. But when I got up the next morning and checked the perimeter, I realized there was no crawl space. In fact, there was no access at all under the house. Just dirt. And the floor beneath my bed was solid oak, sealed shut, no panels, no trap doors. That's when I noticed the draft, a cold breeze coming from the floor itself. Over the next few nights, the sounds continued, always at the same time, 2:16 a.m. Thud, thud, scrape. I started staying up, sitting at the edge of my bed, recording the sound on my phone. Sometimes it would stop when I turned on the light. Other times it would go on for hours. Eventually, I decided to do what anyone desperate for answers would do. I pulled the bed aside and began tapping on the floor. It was hollow. I got a crowbar the next day. The wood was thick, old and reluctant, but after an hour of prying and hammering, a section came loose. What I expected was a subfloor or a foundation beam. What I found was a staircase, not a hatch, not a crawl space. A full wooden staircase descending into pitch-black nothingness. I didn't go down that night. I barely slept. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, feeling like I had unlocked something that shouldn't have been touched. By 2:16 a.m., the sounds started again, but now they were louder, closer. Thud, thud, scrape, thud, thud, scrape, coming up the stairs. But when I forced myself to look, flashlight in hand, the staircase was still empty. Just dusty wooden steps descending into cold black silence. Still, I could smell something coming up. Wet earth, mildew, and something else. Something metallic, like rust or blood. The next day I made a mistake. I went down. I waited until noon, broad daylight, and brought 2 flashlights and my phone. The staircase creaked with every step, but it held. What I found below the house didn't make sense. It wasn't a basement. It wasn't even made of the same material. It looked more like a root cellar at first, but the walls were made of smooth gray stone. No concrete, no dirt. Worse, the air was dead. I don't mean stale. I mean dead. No moisture, no movement. Like the space had been sealed for centuries. As I moved forward, the beam of my flashlight caught something on the wall. Scratches. Hundreds of them. Deep. Layered. Some were long, like from nails. Others, smaller, like teeth. I nearly turned back, but then I saw the door. It was made of blackened wood, iron hinges, and no handle. Just a circular hole in the center, almost like a keyhole, except the hole was large, fist-sized, and something behind it was moving. I swear to you, I saw the faintest flicker of motion just beyond the opening. Slow, fluid, almost like someone pacing. Then a hand reached through. Not a human hand. The fingers were too long. The skin was pale, grayish. The nails were thick, jagged. It didn't reach toward me. It just hovered, inches from the wood, palm open, waiting. I ran. That night I boarded the hole shut, nailed every plank I had over it, moved the bed back, pushed a dresser over it for good measure. But at 2:16 a.m. the sounds returned, louder than ever. Thud, thud, scrape, thud, thud, scrape. Then something new. Tapping. Not from under the floor. From inside the walls. I pressed my ear to the wood, and I swear, I heard whispering. Words I couldn't understand. Guttural syllables spoken too fast, too layered, like multiple voices overlapping. I tried to leave the next morning. My car wouldn't start. The tires were slashed. I tried calling the landlord. The number was disconnected. I asked around town, but nobody even remembered the house. They said that stretch of road had been empty for years. When I showed someone a picture of the place, they looked confused. "That's not here," one man told me. "That house burned down in '92. No one rebuilt it." Back home, I checked Google Earth. The lot where the house should be. Just trees. No structure. No path. No coordinates registered. But I was still there, and the staircase was still beneath my floor. That night, everything changed. The whispers grew louder. The walls began to sweat. Literal beads of moisture forming along the corners, despite the dry air. My reflection in the mirror began to lag, like it was slightly behind me, watching. I didn't sleep. And at 2:16 a.m. something began knocking. Not from the floor this time, from the inside of my closet. When I opened it, the back wall was gone. The staircase was there, again, like the house was shifting, making new entrances. I decided to burn the place down. I poured gasoline, lit matches. Nothing caught. The flames fizzled as if the house refused to burn. I tried to leave again, on foot this time. I walked until the sun rose. Hours passed. I found myself right back at the front door, over and over, trapped. The house was moving me. Now I don't know what's real anymore. Sometimes the lights flicker, and I'm in a different room. The layout shifts. Hallways where there were none. Windows showing views of forests I've never seen. I've torn out entire walls only to find more house behind them. Sometimes I see it, the thing from the well, from behind the door. Not directly. Reflections, dreams, shadows. And every night, and without fail, at 2:16 a.m., the same sound. Thud, thud, scrape. And a new one coming closer. I'm not proud of how I found the house. I was a part-time document preservationist, the kind of guy who gets called when a museum floods, or an old library needs help restoring rare manuscripts. Most of the time, my job was boring. Scanning fragile paper, neutralizing mold, preserving ink. But I lived for the rare gigs, the strange ones, the forgotten things people unearthed in basements or barns or condemned buildings. This job came in through a cold email. No subject line, no intro, just a single sentence. You deal with books others can't. Attached was a map, no address, just a set of hand-drawn directions. It was a 4-hour drive into the woods of northern Maine, with the final stretch taking me off-road and onto a barely visible trail. No cell service, no landmarks. But after about a mile of driving over cracked earth and tree roots, I saw it. A single gray house, Victorian in style but utterly weather-beaten. The paint had long since peeled away, and moss clung to the walls like a second skin. The porch was warped and sinking, and every window I saw was dark. But there was a sign above the front door, carved into the wood with an eerie precision. Archivist. There was no bell. I knocked, waited, and just as I turned to leave, the door creaked open on its own. I stepped inside and was hit with the scent of damp parchment, dust, and old firewood. The temperature dropped by at least 10 degrees. The house was silent but lived in. A fireplace smoldered low. Books, and hundreds of them, lined the walls in towering shelves, some stacked precariously in corners. In the center of the room was a desk covered in scrolls and pages with notes scrawled in languages I couldn't identify. Some didn't even use letters. They were symbols, runes, geometric patterns that shifted subtly if you stared too long. There was no sign of who owned the place, but a note sat on the desk, written in an ink so dark it shimmered red under the light. If you read, you're responsible. Begin with the green volume, finish before dark. And beneath that, a thick velvet-bound book. I should have walked out, but something about the place. I can't explain it. It felt like the house was waiting, watching, and the book, it pulled at me, like a forgotten memory I had to retrieve. I sat down and opened it. The first page was blank, then the words began to appear. Not handwritten, they formed on the paper. Slowly, one line at a time. It began with a story of a man who inherited a house from an uncle he didn't remember. A house in the woods, with a library that changed when no one was looking. The man in the story started cataloging the books, until he realized one of them was cataloging him. I paused. The pages began flipping on their own. I tried to close the book. It wouldn't budge. My hand stuck to the cover like it had fused to my skin. The room dimmed. Outside, I could see the sun dropping unnaturally fast, like someone was dragging it below the horizon. And then I heard it. Footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate, pacing, back and forth, back and forth. I called out. No answer. But the footsteps stopped. I turned back to the book, and now the story had changed. It was writing in real time. The man closes the book. He looks up the stairs. He does not know he is already being written into the house. I slammed it shut, and finally it let go. I rushed out of the house, heart pounding, half expecting to see someone watching me from the upstairs window. But no one was there. Yet. Back in my car, I realized the road I came in on was gone, completely vanished. In its place was dense forest, thicker than I remembered. The trees didn't even look the same. They were tall, dark, bark slick like wet stone. I checked my GPS. Nothing. Just static. No signal. Not even the time was showing. I walked the perimeter of the house for hours. It was the only structure for miles. Worse, the house didn't stay the same. The front porch was now on the side of the house. A window I'd seen before was now a door. And the sky. No stars. No moon. Just a dim, colorless haze that never shifted, like time itself was frozen in some endless dusk. I didn't sleep. The next day, if you could call it that, I returned to the house. I didn't have a choice. I needed answers. Inside, the fire was still burning, as though no time had passed. The book was gone, but in its place was another, black leather, bound with wire, and a note. You've begun. Finish the archive. Every room in the house held books now. Some open, pages fluttering on their own. Some whispering. Yes, I heard them. Each book whispered a different thing. Some in English. Others in languages I didn't recognize. One simply repeated a date. October 19th, 1913. Over and over, thousands of times. I opened a red volume and saw my name. It detailed everything I'd done since entering the house. Then it started writing the next line. He reads the page that will trap him here. I dropped it. But the whispering got louder. Books were falling off shelves, some opening mid-air. And then, a door appeared. In the floor, a hatch lined with iron, rusted but pulsing with heat. It wasn't there before. I opened it. A ladder descended into darkness. I climbed down. Each rung vibrated, like the house was breathing. Below was a massive chamber, walls lined not with shelves but with slots, like safety deposit boxes. Hundreds, each labeled with a name. Some names were familiar. authors, historians, scholars long dead. Others were blank, and one in the center of the far wall had my name carved freshly. Inside it, another book, no cover, just a blackened stack of pages bound in sinew. And when I touched it, I saw everything. Not a vision, not a dream. More like a memory I'd never lived. I saw myself, years from now, sitting at the desk upstairs, aged, broken, writing new books with a shaking hand, feeding them into the shelves. I saw the next person arriving, confused, curious, and me handing them the green book, just like it happened to me. I was the archivist, or I would be, unless I stopped it, unless I burned the house. I raced up the ladder, heart hammering. I grabbed every candle, every scrap of dry paper, piled it in the center of the floor, and lit it. At first the flames caught, and then they didn't. They turned black. Not smoke, the flames themselves. And from the pages of every open book in the house, screams erupted. Not metaphorical, literal screams, like voices trapped in ink, begging to be let out. I ran. I found a mirror in the hallway I hadn't seen before, old warped glass. My reflection stared back, but it didn't move when I did. It smiled and whispered, "Your chapter is written." I don't remember how I escaped. I woke up days later in a hospital 2 towns over. They found me wandering the woods, dehydrated and incoherent. When I tried to go back, there was nothing. No trail, no house, just empty woods. But sometimes, I get packages in the mail. No return address. Inside each is a page, handwritten, with stories I've never told, about people I don't know, and in the margins, a note. Archive these. I moved into the apartment after a breakup. Not a dramatic one, just long, drawn out, and exhausting. We were engaged, but it had been over for months before either of us said it out loud. So when the lease on our old place ended, I packed my things and found a 1-bedroom in a quieter part of the city. The building was older, 5 stories, cracked white brick, creaky elevators. But it was cheap and the neighbors seemed quiet. My unit was on the 4th floor, apartment 4B. The hallway had that old carpet smell and dim lighting that made every shadow stretch a little too long, but I liked it. It felt like solitude. Across from me was 4A. The first time I saw her, it was my second night there. I was locking my door and she stepped out of hers. She was in her late 30s maybe, pale, tired-looking, thin shoulder-length dark hair, wore a long coat and kept her eyes down. We nodded. That was it. For a few weeks we never spoke more than that. Just quiet nods in the hall. Sometimes she'd be coming home when I was leaving. Sometimes I'd hear her TV through the wall. Never loud, just the faint murmur of talk shows or old movies. Then one night I came home late. I was unlocking my door when I heard her voice. She was whispering through the people. Not talking to me, talking to herself, I thought. "He comes at 3:17. Don't answer. Don't answer. Don't..." I paused, hand on my doorknob. Then she said louder, "I know you're listening." I turned. She was inside her apartment. Door cracked open an inch, just enough for one pale eye to watch me. We stared at each other for a second, and then she shut the door. I stood there a long time before finally going in. The next morning I left early. When I opened my door, something had been slid underneath. It was a piece of notebook paper. Torn edges. Handwritten. "Do not open your door if you hear a knock at 3:17 a.m. No signature, no explanation. I checked the hallway. Empty. I looked at her door. Closed. That night I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe she was off her meds. Maybe she was just lonely and weird. But I couldn't sleep. I checked the clock. 3:02 a.m. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening. The building was dead quiet. Not even the usual humming pipes or elevator thuds. Just silence. Then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., there was a knock. 3 short raps. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. The knock wasn't loud, just enough to be heard. I tiptoed toward the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. I stared longer. Nothing. Just the hall and the door to 4A closed. I waited 5 more minutes before going back to bed. The next morning I opened the door to leave for work and found a second note. He waits longer if you look. Don't look. Again, no signature. No explanation. I slid the paper into my jacket pocket and left, heart pounding. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, all the lights on. No knock came, but around 2:45 a.m. I heard something through the wall. Her voice, software chanting, repeating a series of numbers. 17, 17, 17. Then silence. The next night I left my apartment to go knock on her door. I had to ask her what was going on. What the hell the notes meant. Why she was watching me through the peephole. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. Still nothing. Then from the other side of the door, "He'll come for you if you keep knocking." I stepped back. "I just want to talk," I said. Silence. Then, "Don't let him hear your voice." I didn't sleep that night either. At 3:17 I heard the knock again, but this time it was louder. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. Then again, this time harder, faster. Knock, knock, knock. I backed into the kitchen, grabbed a knife. When it stopped, I crept to the peephole. Nothing. But I heard breathing. Low, shallow, right on the other side of the door. And then, fingernails, scraping the door slowly, deliberate, like whoever or whatever was out there wanted me to know they weren't in a rush. The next day I skipped work. I stayed home, tried calling the landlord. No answer. I knocked on other doors in the hallway. No one opened. The whole building felt vacant, like every apartment was empty, except mine and hers. That night I blocked the door with furniture. I wedged a chair under the knob, pushed the table against it. 3:17 came. No knock. Just the sound of the TV through the wall. Loud. A game show or something. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard laughter. Too loud. Too distorted. I banged on the wall. It stopped. And then she spoke clearly. "You're making it worse." I didn't sleep for 2 days. Then I did. I don't remember falling asleep, only waking up to find the chain lock on the door unhooked. I always locked it. Always. But it was dangling loose, and something had been slid under the door again. Not a note this time. A photo. Black and white. Grainy. A man in a dark coat standing in the hallway, directly in front of my door. No timestamp. No camera angle I could recognize. But what chilled me? The man had no face, just a blur where his features should have been. And beneath the photo, written in red ink, "You looked." I knocked on 4A's door again that evening. No answer. I was about to leave when I noticed something. The door wasn't fully closed. I pushed it open gently and stepped inside. The apartment was dark, bare, no furniture, no dishes, just dust. And in the center of the room, dozens of photographs spread out on the floor, all black and white, all of the hallway. Some were empty. Some had a man in them, a faceless man, standing in front of doors, facing them, sometimes close, sometimes far, but always at 3:17 a.m., written on the backs. I turned to leave, and standing in the doorway was her, pale, still. She looked at me like I'd just committed a crime. "You let him in," she said quietly. I said nothing. She pointed behind me. I turned, and the photographs were gone. I ran out of her apartment, back into mine, slammed the door. That night I stayed up with every light on, and at 3:17 a.m. there was no knock, only a whisper through the keyhole. "Open the door." I didn't, but in the morning the door was open. Wide. I live somewhere else now. Far away. Different building. Different city. But 2 nights ago, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. and on my nightstand was a photo of my new hallway, and standing in front of my new door was a man in a dark coat, no face, and written on the back, "You moved, but he didn't." I moved into the apartment in March. It was temporary, a sublet, while I transitioned jobs and waited for my new lease to start in June. The building was one of those beige aging complexes on the edge of town. Not bad, not great. Thin walls, flickering lights, the kind of place where you see someone down the hall and pretend you didn't. The unit was on the ground floor, tucked in the back near the laundry room. Sparse, quiet. The guy before me had left most of his furniture behind, which I didn't mind. I didn't plan to unpack much. On my second day, I met the maintenance man. Or rather, I saw him watching me. It was maybe 6 p.m. I was unloading groceries and glanced out the front window. He was standing by the dumpsters, facing my window directly. Not moving. Just standing. Middle-aged. Tall. Faded blue coveralls. Greasy gray hair tucked into a ball cap. He didn't wave or nod. Just stared. I blinked. He was gone. I figured maybe I'd imagined it. I was tired. The move had taken more out of me than I thought. But I'd remember that face. The next morning I found a slip of paper on my kitchen counter. Folded. No writing on the outside. I hadn't left it there. I opened it. Inside, printed in block letters, "Call if anything breaks. I'm always close." No name, no phone number. Just that. I didn't know how it got there. The door had been locked. Windows too. I chalked it up to the last tenant. Maybe he left it behind. Creepy, sure, but not sinister. At least not then. That night I went to throw out some trash. The hallway outside was dark. Motion sensor light wasn't working. As I passed the laundry room, I heard something. A creak. Then a soft voice. "You move quiet." I froze, peered inside. The maintenance man was sitting on top of a dryer, arms folded, legs swinging slowly, watching me. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said, smiling. "Just keeping an eye on things." I nodded, unsure of what to say. Took a step backward. "People don't notice the little stuff," he said, "but I do." Then he raised a hand, covered in grime, and pointed at my unit. "Especially down there. You gotta be careful." After that, I started seeing him more often. Not talking, just him standing nearby, outside the laundry room, in the back parking lot. Once, when I opened my blinds, I saw him crouched near my air conditioner. Not working on it, just crouched, looking up at my window like he was waiting for me to notice. I asked the front office if he actually worked there. They confirmed. His name was Henry. Been there over 20 years. "Quiet guy," the clerk said. "Reliable. Why?" "No reason," I said. "Just wondering." One night I came home and noticed something strange. The doorknob to my apartment was warm, like someone had just been holding it. I hesitated, then unlocked the door and stepped inside. Nothing looked disturbed, but something felt wrong. The air inside was still. Too still. I checked the bathroom, the bedroom, the closets. Empty. Then I noticed it. A footprint. Just one. Near the kitchen. Wet. Boot-sized. I wear sneakers. I called the front desk, demanded they check the security footage. They said the cameras in that wing hadn't worked in months. Of course they hadn't. A few days later, I came home to find the lock on my door replaced. Not removed, replaced. New hardware, slightly different keyhole. My old key still worked, but the lock wasn't the same. I didn't ask for it. No one had notified me. I called the office again. They said no one had put in a work order. Maybe the tenant before me did, they said. Maybe it was backlogged. but I checked the lease, nothing about new locks. When I asked if Henry might have done it, the clerk paused. He does handle locks sometimes, but he'd leave a note. He didn't. I started pushing a chair in front of the door at night. Childish, maybe, but it helped me sleep. Until one morning, I woke up to find the chair moved, just a few inches, tilted slightly, still close to the door, but not where I left it. And beneath it, a screwdriver, small, flathead, worn like it had been used 1,000 times. I didn't own a screwdriver. I sat on the floor staring at it for a long time. Then I got up and packed a bag. I spent that night at a hotel. I needed to clear my head, maybe get some distance. But at 2:14 a.m. I got a phone call. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened back, there was no voice, just breathing. Steady. Male. Then, just before it ended, I heard a soft voice. "You're not quiet anymore." I called the police the next morning, told them everything. The notes, the staring, the possible break-in. They filed a report, promised to send a unit to do a wellness check. I don't know if they ever did. I went back to the apartment 2 days later. Nothing looked different. Except for one thing, the vent cover in the bedroom ceiling was missing. Just gone. No tools nearby. No dust on the floor. Like it had been unscrewed, carefully, and taken away. I stood on the bed and looked up inside, just darkness. But I swear for a second I heard something. A rustle, then nothing. I moved out 2 weeks early. Lost my deposit. Didn't care. When I was loading the last box into my car, Henry showed up. Just appeared behind me. "You leaving already?" he asked, and I nodded. "Job change." He smiled. "That's too bad. This one's real quiet." I said nothing. He watched me for a while, then handed me something. A key. Old, rusted. Not to my apartment. I'd returned those already. "Just in case you come back," he said. Then he walked off. I tossed the key into the sewer and never looked back. Months later, I looked up the building online. No big news. Nothing criminal. No missing persons. But on the local housing forum, I found a thread. "Anyone else feel watched at Hillside Gardens?" Dozens of replies. People hearing breathing in vents. Furniture moved inches at a time. One post chilled me. "There's a maintenance guy who stares through your windows, but when you report him, no one ever does anything." I deleted my account and never looked again. Last week a letter came in the mail. No return address. Inside was a key. Old, rusted. The exact one I threw away. And taped to the envelope, a photo of me sleeping. When I got the job at Travis and Price Analytics, I didn't expect much. I was just out of college, desperate, broke. It was a contract gig, mostly overnight data cleaning and report formatting, the kind of work no one wants to do. The office was a converted warehouse on the edge of a dead retail park. Flickering overhead lights, humming servers, those gray carpets that smell like mildew no matter how often they vacuum. I worked alone most nights, but for the first few weeks there was another guy. Name tag said Leon. Middle-aged, always wore the same clothes. Wrinkled white button-up, black tie, faded blue slacks, neatly combed hair, square glasses. He didn't say much, just typed at his terminal like a machine. At first I figured he was a lifer, some senior IT guy stuck in a basement loop of spreadsheets and server backups. Then I realized something odd. He was always there. I mean always. I started my shift at 9 p.m. and left around 6 a.m. Leon was already seated when I arrived and still working when I left. At first I thought maybe he lived close and worked an early shift, but then I stayed late one morning, till about 8:30. And he never moved. Didn't even go to the bathroom. No phone calls, no stretching, no breaks, just typing. Eyes locked to the screen. No food, no drink. It didn't seem possible. One night I finally asked. "Hey," I said, "how long's your shift?" He didn't answer right away, just paused mid-keystroke like he was buffering. Then he said, "I don't have one." I smiled awkwardly. "What, like, on salary?" "No," he said. "I just don't leave." I thought he was messing with me. "Seriously?" He didn't look up. "Some people go home, some people don't," he said. And that was it. I asked my supervisor about him the next day. "Leon," she said. "Yeah, he's around." "That's all you can say?" I asked. "He works here, right?" She hesitated. Then she said, "Technically. He's part of an old security contract. Just ignore him. He's harmless." That wasn't reassuring. A week later, I noticed something new. Leon wasn't just working on reports. He was watching cameras, security feeds. I saw the interface one night when I walked past his desk. He had multiple windows open, each one a black and white feed from different areas of the building. Even weirder, they weren't just live. He was watching past footage, scrolling through timestamps, rewinding, slowing down, zooming in, and all of the footage was of me. I confronted him. "What is this?" I asked, pointing at the screen. Leon didn't flinch. "Reviewing," he said. "Reviewing what?" He finally looked at me. "I'm learning your patterns." I laughed nervously, unsure if he was serious. "Okay, well, that's creepy." "No," he said flatly. "Creepy is when they stop following the patterns." I stared at him. "What?" "You'll see," he said, then turned back to his screen. I told the supervisor again. She sighed. "I know he's weird," she said, "but his file goes back 15 years. No incidents, no complaints." 15 years? "Yeah. But this building's only been open for 8. She paused. "That's not possible." I showed her the security footage he had up. She looked disturbed, not angry, not annoyed, but genuinely unsettled. Then she said something I'll never forget. "That security system isn't live." "What?" "We deactivated the internal cams 2 years ago." The next night I arrived and Leon wasn't at his desk. I thought maybe he was finally gone, but around 1:15 a.m. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. He was standing in the dark just past the hallway, arms by his sides. "Something changed," he said. "What?" "You did." He took a slow step forward. "I don't like it when the data shifts. It means something's off." I stood up, heart pounding. "You're really starting to freak me out." "You moved your chair," he said. 3 inches to the left. That's not how you sit." "What are you talking about?" He stared at me. "You've never broken the pattern until now." Then he walked away. That night I went to the security room, the one only supervisors are supposed to have access to. The door was cracked open. Inside were tapes, dozens of them. Old-school VHS stacked on shelves labeled by date and shift number. I pulled one out. It was dated 2006. I hit play. It was grainy footage of the office floor. Just rows of empty desks. And then, Leon, sitting at the same desk he sits at now, wearing the same clothes, typing, alone. I kept watching different tapes. All the same. Same posture, same routine, same chair. I checked the tape labeled March 11th, 2023, a few months before I was hired. Same thing. Except this time, he looked directly at the camera, like he knew I'd be watching it later. He even raised a hand and waved. I stopped going in, told my supervisor I needed time off. She didn't even ask why. Just said, "You're not the first." That night I had a dream. Leon was sitting in my apartment, at my desk, typing. He looked up and said, "Now you're the pattern." I went back to the office the next day to grab my stuff. Leon wasn't there, but on my chair was a note typed on an old printer. Dot matrix. "See you soon." I moved out of state 2 weeks later. Got a new job, different industry, smaller company, no overnight shifts. But last week I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside, a VHS tape. Label read, Night Shift, July 3rd, 2025. That's next week. I haven't watched it. Yet. But I know what's on it, because sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, and I swear I hear typing. I never met the guy who used to live in Unit 6C, but I've spent months picking up the pieces he left behind. It started when I moved into Brook Pine Flats, a mid-size apartment complex off a quiet road. A little too quiet. No traffic, no real foot traffic. Just a U-shaped building with yellowed blinds and numbers peeling off the doors. I took Unit 6B second floor near the stairwell. The place was cheap and that should have been a warning. But I had just lost my job and broken up with my girlfriend. I didn't have many options. First night there, the complex was dead silent. No TVs, no voices. Just the faint hum of a fridge and the occasional groan of the building settling. Then came a knock. Not on my door. On the one next to me, 6C. I opened mine to look. No one was in the hall. But the door to 6C? It was open. Not wide open, just cracked. A few inches. There was no light inside. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. I closed my door, locked it, and told myself I didn't care. The next morning, I went to the front office to ask who lived in 6C. The manager, a short woman with permanent eye bags, just said, "Nobody right now." Really? The door was open last night. She looked at me for a beat longer than necessary, then said, "Probably maintenance." There was something off in her tone, like she was reciting from a mental script. That night I heard footsteps. Not loud, just a slow shuffle across the hallway outside. I peeked out the peephole. No one there, but 6C's door is still ajar. Same 3-inch opening. I watched for several minutes, waiting to see if anyone came or went. Nothing. On the third day, I noticed something new. A piece of paper had been slid under my door. Plain white, typed in all caps, "Do not interact with 6C." No signature, no explanation. I walked straight to the office. The manager wasn't there, so I waited. 15 minutes later, a man came out from the back. Older, maybe mid-60s. Introduced himself as Frank, head of maintenance. I showed him the note. He didn't even read it. Just said, "Ignore it. Kids around here pull that crap." "There are kids in this building?" He looked away. "Sometimes." I never saw a single child in Brook Pine Flats. Later that night, I saw someone standing inside 6C. I had just gotten home, groceries in hand. As I passed the unit, the door swung slightly inward, as if moved by a breeze. Inside, in the dark, a shape stood near the window. A man. Medium build. Couldn't see his face. Just the outline. He wasn't moving. He wasn't even watching me. He was looking straight ahead, like he was watching something only he could see. I kept walking. Didn't say a word. Didn't even look again until I was back in my own apartment, locked in. I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing sounds. Clicking. Like someone tapping their fingernail on wood. It wasn't constant, just enough to keep me on edge. At around 3:20 a.m., I heard a voice, muffled, through the wall we shared. It was muttering, over and over again. I pressed my ear to the wall. The words were garbled, but one part came through clearly. "He lives in the crawl space now." I stopped asking questions, but Brook Pine Flats didn't stop giving me answers. On a Wednesday morning, I came home from a grocery run to find my apartment door unlocked. I never leave it unlocked. Nothing was missing, but something had been added. A note on my kitchen table, typed like the first. "He's learning you." I reported it to the manager. She barely reacted. "Nothing's on the cameras," she said. "You sure you didn't leave it open?" I told her I was sure. She stared at me, then leaned in and whispered, "You're not the first." I waited for more, but she just walked away. That night I barricaded my door, shoved the couch in front of it, locked every window. At 2:11 a.m. the power went out. Total darkness. I waited, phone in hand, flashlight ready. Nothing happened for a while. Then, through the shared wall, I heard scratching. Slow, rhythmic scratching, like nails across drywall. Then the voice again. "He wants to know where you keep your shoes." I didn't sleep. I walked the complex in daylight the next morning, looked at the other units. Some were occupied. Most weren't. But what I noticed most, none of the windows had blinds open. Not one. Just yellowed plastic and drawn curtains. The whole place felt like it was watching itself. I started sleeping at a motel, but I couldn't stay away forever. I returned one afternoon to grab clothes. As I opened the door to my apartment, I felt watched. From the hallway, from Unit 6C, I turned. The door was shut for the first time in days. Taped to it was a photograph. Polaroid. It showed my bedroom, taken from the inside, while I was asleep. On the back, "You leave, he follows." I went back to the office. Frank wasn't there. Neither was the manager. No staff, just a locked door. I looked up city records. Found nothing about a Frank ever employed by Brook Pine. No records of anyone living in 6C either. That night I set up my phone to record while I slept. The footage started normal. Then when around 2:46 a.m., the closet door creaked open. A man stepped out. Not quickly, not stealthily. Just walked out like he lived there. He stood at the foot of my bed, watched me sleep for 38 minutes. Then turned, walked to the wall I shared with 6C, and simply stepped through it. Like the wall wasn't there. I moved out the next day. Didn't pack anything. Didn't leave a forwarding address. But 3 days later, a package arrived at my new place. No return label. Inside, shoe, one of mine. The one I left by the bedroom door and folded inside it. Another note. He liked this one. I took the house-sitting job because it was supposed to be easy. A month alone in a beautiful 2-story house in the suburbs while the owners were overseas. Free food, decent pay, no pets, and a fully stocked media room. The couple, the Hargroves, were friendly. Early 50s. She was an artist. He worked in finance. They met me once, handed me a binder of instructions, gave me a hug, and left for a 4-week trip to Europe. I had just gotten laid off and was between apartments, so it was perfect timing. But from day one, something felt off. The house wasn't haunted. Nothing jumped out at me. No creaking floorboards, no cold spots, no weird voices in the night. It was just uncomfortable, like I wasn't alone, even when I was. There were rules. Nothing too weird, just detailed. Don't enter the master bedroom. It's locked anyway. Water the plants every 2 days. Don't go in the attic. Old flooring not safe. Mail goes in the basket by the kitchen. And if anyone comes to the door asking for us, don't let them in, no matter what they say. That last part struck me as a little paranoid, but I figured they had problems with salespeople or something. Whatever. I was being paid to relax. I settled in. For the first few days, nothing happened. I explored the house, cleaned a bit, watched old movies, slept in the guest room. But then one night I noticed something odd. The hallway light upstairs, the one at the end past the bathroom, would be on when I woke up. I always turned it off before bed. I was careful about it. I figured maybe I forgot. Easy to do when you're staying in a new place. But it kept happening. 3 nights in a row. Off when I went to bed. On when I got up. No timers. No motion sensors. Just on. I emailed the Hargroves. Asked if the hallway light was on some kind of automated setting. No reply. They had said they'd be traveling through remote areas, spotty internet, so that wasn't too weird. I let it go. Then one morning I found footprints, barefoot, coming down the stairs. Not mine, too large, wide set. They led to the kitchen, then stopped. The floor was clean before. I'm sure of it. I followed them back upstairs. They ended at the master bedroom door. Still locked. I was about to call the police, but I talked myself out of it. The door was locked, no signs of forced entry. Maybe the Hargroves had someone come by before I got there, a neighbor or friend. Maybe they tracked something in. Still, I started locking my bedroom door at night and sleeping with a knife in the drawer. The following week, the doorbell rang. It was about 6:45 p.m., just getting dark. A man stood outside, mid-40s, balding, wore a navy jacket and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I didn't open the door. He looked straight at the peephole and said, "Hey, sorry to bother you. I'm looking for Craig." "Mr. Hargrove?" I answered through the door. "They're out of town." He tilted his head. "They didn't tell me. He said he'd be around." "They're gone for a month," I said. "You can come back in a few weeks." The man didn't move, didn't blink. "Mind if I leave something for him?" "Sure," I said. He reached into his coat. I tensed, but he only pulled out a small brown envelope and placed it on the mat. Then he smiled and said, "Tell him." "I know." Then he walked away. I waited a full 10 minutes before opening the door and grabbing the envelope. It was sealed. No name, no return address. I opened it. Inside was a single photo. A Polaroid. It showed me, asleep, in the guest bed, taken from the hallway. I called the police. An officer came out, took a statement, looked around. He found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No prints. Nothing. He told me it was probably a prank. Maybe a neighbor messing around. But the closest house was 2 blocks away. The Hargroves' property backed up to woods on 2 sides. Nobody just walks by here. I tried calling the Hargroves. Still no answer. Their number rang, then went to voicemail. I texted, emailed. Nothing. The envelope stayed on the kitchen counter. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the door to the attic was open. The string was down. The hatch pulled open. I stood there staring up into the dark square above the hall. I hadn't touched it. I called the police again. This time 2 officers came out. They checked the attic, the master bedroom, the basement. Nothing. Empty. They were polite, but I could tell they thought I was imagining things. When they left, one of them gave me a card. "Call us if anything else happens." I kept the card on the nightstand. That night I locked every door and window, moved a chair in front of the guest room door, slept with the lights on. At 3:11 a.m. I woke up. No sound, just a feeling that something was in the room. I didn't move, didn't open my eyes. I could feel the air was wrong, still heavy, like someone was holding their breath. After maybe 5 minutes, I cracked one eye open. No one there. But on the floor by the bed was my phone. I always charge it on the desk. It was unlocked, and the camera app was open. I didn't sleep again. The next day, I packed my things, left a note for the Hargroves explaining that something wasn't right, that I couldn't stay. Then I left. 3 days later, I got a call. Unknown number. I didn't answer. The voicemail was less than 10 seconds long. A man's voice. "You should have stayed asleep." The Hargroves never contacted me again. No angry email. No questions about why I left early. No follow-up at all. A month after that, I looked up the address. The listing was gone. Not just taken down, it was scrubbed. It was like the house didn't exist. But sometimes I still get mail. No return address. No postmark. Just white envelopes slid under my door. And inside, photos of me sleeping. Always from slightly different angles. Always more recent than the last. The listing didn't seem suspicious at first. I found it on a rental site I'd used before. Not one of the huge ones, just a niche local service that offered extended stays for working professionals. It sounded perfect for me. I'd just taken a consulting job that meant relocating for 3 months, and I didn't want the hassle of a hotel. The property was advertised as a garden-level suite in a quiet residential neighborhood. The pictures showed a separate entrance, a modest living area, kitchenette, bedroom, and private bath. Clean. Affordable. Only one line under the description gave me pause. Shared property. Host lives upstairs. Please respect boundaries. But I figured, hey, I've rented basements before. Most hosts just want quiet and rent money. I booked it for 12 weeks, and that's how I ended up living underneath him. The host's name was Daniel. He met me at the door when I arrived. Late 40s, tall, soft-spoken, a little too friendly. Had that bland, polite smile that never quite touched his eyes. Wore slippers outside. Said things like, "We're going to get along just fine, and I don't come downstairs so you won't see much of me." He walked me around the suite. Everything seemed fine. Still, as he climbed the stairs back to his floor, I felt something. A tension in the air, like the house was holding its breath. The first week went by without much incident. Daniel was quiet, too quiet. I never heard music, TV, phone calls, nothing. Just footsteps, regular ones, slow, almost rhythmic. Sometimes I heard them late at night, pacing directly above my bedroom. At 2 a.m. and at 4:20 a.m. and never once during the day. On the 9th night, I noticed something new. My toothbrush was wet. I always dried it off after brushing. It was just a habit. But when I went to brush that evening, the bristles were already damp. It was the kind of thing you question. Was I misremembering? Had I used it already and forgotten? I let it go, until it happened again. And again. Then the shampoo level started changing. The toilet paper roll moved even when I hadn't used it. Tiny things, but consistent. I checked all the locks. The door to the suite had a deadbolt, but it was older, a little wobbly. The only windows were narrow and high, those small horizontal basement kind. I started taking photos before I left each morning. Of the bathroom, the bed, my toiletries. I marked the position of things with tape, just subtle enough to go unnoticed. And every day when I came back, something had shifted. Never major. A towel draped slightly different. A drawer not fully closed. Once I found the corner of my blanket folded over in a way I never do. I was being watched, or worse, visited. I finally brought it up to Daniel. Tried to keep it casual. Said something like, "Hey, just checking. You don't have a spare key to the suite, right?" He smiled. "Of course not." "Okay," I said. "Just wanted to be sure." A couple things moved around. Wasn't sure if maybe maintenance came by. That's when his smile dropped. "There's no maintenance," he said. "This is a private residence." He stared at me too long. Then, still smiling, "You must be imagining things." That night I set up my phone to record a time-lapse while I was gone. I positioned it facing the hallway. Nothing fancy, just to ease my mind. When I reviewed the footage that night, I watched 7 hours go by in fast motion. Nothing. Then, at 3:14 p.m., movement. The door to the suite opened slowly. A man's silhouette stepped in. He stood just out of view, but the shadow on the floor showed him leaning in, listening. He didn't move for 6 minutes. Then he stepped back and shut the door. I changed the locks that night, bought a portable deadbolt and a wedge. I considered moving out, but I only had 3 weeks left and the job was keeping me busy. Still, I started sleeping with a knife next to the bed. The next night I heard the footsteps again, but this time they didn't stay upstairs. They creaked down the steps, one at a time. I sat frozen in bed, knife in hand, staring at the hallway. The steps stopped just outside the door. Then a knock. Software, deliberate, 3 knocks. Then silence. I never moved. never responded. Eventually, the footsteps receded. In the morning, the door was still locked, but the carpet in front of it was slightly damp. I checked the time-lapse again. This time, nothing. It had stopped recording at 2:01 a.m., exactly 1 minute before the knock. I emailed the rental platform, reported what happened, asked to break the lease early. They replied the next day saying the listing had been removed due to complaints, but they refused to confirm what kind. When I went back to the site to look up Daniel's listing, it was gone. Not deactivated, scrubbed. No record of it. I decided I'd leave at the end of the week. But that night, everything escalated. I came home around 9 p.m., found the lights off. All of them. I always left the kitchen one on. I flipped the switch. Nothing. Power out? No. The fridge was still humming. Just the bulbs. I walked through with my flashlight. Everything looked fine, until I got to the bathroom. On the mirror, drawn in steam, were 2 words. Stay still. I hadn't showered that morning. There was no steam, only writing. I packed everything. I was going to leave, even if it meant eating the deposit. But when I got to the door, the interior door to the stairs, there was a note taped to it, typed clean. If you leave, I can't help you. I turned, and standing in the hallway was Daniel, at the base of the stairs, wearing a bathrobe. Hands clasped. He said nothing, just stared, then slowly walked back up the stairs, step by step, never breaking eye contact. I left that night, checked into a hotel, never went back for the rest of my stuff. A few days later, I went to the police, filed a report. They investigated. When they went to the property, it was vacant, door wide open, no furniture, no sign of Daniel. The department told me something I still can't shake. The utility records for that address showed no account activity for the last 4 months. The place shouldn't have had power or water. A week after that, a package arrived at my new place. No return address. Inside was a key, a house key, taped to a folded note. The note said, "Still have your toothbrush." When I found the ad, I wasn't in a position to be picky. I'd just ended a long-term relationship and couldn't afford a place alone. The listing was simple. Roommate wanted. Must be clean, quiet, and employed. $600 per month. Everything included. There were no photos, just a phone number and a location. A residential neighborhood on the edge of the city I barely knew. I called. A man answered on the second ring. He said his name was Greg, and if I could come by that night to meet, we'd see if it was a good fit. Greg was older, maybe late 50s, clean cut, crisp white shirt tucked into khakis. The house was plain but spotless. Hardwood floors, a long hallway, and 2 bedrooms at the end across from each other. I noticed right away how quiet it was. No TV, no radio, just the faint ticking of a clock somewhere behind a closed door. Greg didn't offer a tour, just pointed to the second bedroom and said, "It's yours if you want it. Rent's due on the 1st. I asked about rules. He said only one. No locked doors inside the house, ever. He smiled when he said it, like it was a joke. I wasn't in a position to argue. The first 2 weeks were uneventful. Greg kept to himself. He cooked quietly, showered early, and never brought anyone home. I figured I could live with that. But then I started noticing things. My door, which I never locked out of respect, was sometimes cracked open in the mornings, even though I always closed it at night. My desk drawer would be slightly ajar. Nothing missing, just touched. I told myself I was imagining it. One night I came home late. Greg was already asleep, or so I thought. I went to the kitchen to grab water, and as I passed the hallway, I caught sight of his door, wide open, but the room was pitch black. I whispered his name. Nothing. Just silence. I stepped closer. The light from the kitchen barely reached the edge of his bed. I could make out the shape of a person under the covers, but the breathing was wrong. Slow, shallow, too still. I backed away. I started sleeping with a chair wedged under my doorknob. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make things worse, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. on the dot every night with no sound, just a presence. One night I pretended to be asleep. I left the door open just an inch. At exactly 3:01 I heard floorboards creak. Then a shadow moved across the sliver of light from the hallway. I held my breath. The shadow stopped just outside my room. I could hear Greg breathing now, soft and low, like he was listening. Then the sound of something being placed on the floor. Quiet footsteps back down the hall. In the morning I found it. A single piece of toast on a paper napkin laid neatly by my door. Cold, untouched. I knocked on Greg's door. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I turned the knob. Unlocked. The room was empty. The bed hadn't been slept in. The closet was bare. No clothes, no shoes, not even a hanger. I checked the drawers. Empty. Greg was gone. I called the number he had listed in the ad. It didn't ring, just a dead tone. I waited a few hours, left the house, and came back that night. Everything looked the same, except now Greg's door was closed again, and locked. I hadn't locked it. That night the toast came back. Same time, same place. I checked the hallway. No one. But the bathroom light had been turned on. Just left on. I hadn't touched it. I packed a bag the next day and left. I went to a friend's place across town and crashed on their couch. I didn't go back. I didn't even think about it until 3 weeks later when I got a call from an unknown number. A voicemail. "You still owe me for the full month." That's all it said. No name. But it was Greg's voice. I went to the police. They asked for the address. I gave it. They looked it up. The house had been empty for 2 years. Foreclosed. No utilities. No one listed on the lease. I still have the voicemail saved. Sometimes I replay it, just to be sure I didn't imagine it. It always ends the same way. That cold voice saying, "Don't lock the doors. It's rude." I took the night shift because I thought it would be quiet. No people, no meetings, no interruptions. Just me, a set of keys and a checklist. I was assigned to a medium-sized office building on the edge of an industrial park. 4 floors. Mostly insurance, law firms, and small consulting agencies. The kind of place that felt abandoned after sunset. My job was simple. Start at 10 p.m., finish by 4 a.m., clean each floor, log anything broken or suspicious, and clock out. The company gave me a uniform, a badge, and warned me not to mess with any tenant property. "Stick to the contract," they said. "Don't overstep." The first 2 weeks were uneventful. The building was cold, fluorescent, and dead quiet. The upper floors always took longer because of the glass offices. Too many fingerprints. But I got into a rhythm. I kept my earbuds in and rarely thought about anything beyond the mop bucket in front of me. But then I started noticing the chairs. Conference room chairs, to be specific. I'd stacked them neatly before moving on to the next suite, but when I circled back around, 1 or 2 would be pulled out. Not all the way, just subtly off kilter, like someone had barely risen from them. At first I blamed my own memory. Maybe I hadn't pushed them in. Maybe the cleaning solution was messing with me. But I started paying closer attention. It wasn't just the chairs. On the 3rd floor in one of the corner suites, I'd find coffee mugs left on desks that had been cleaned 10 minutes earlier. In another office, a printer would start warming up the moment I stepped inside, whirring, blinking, but never printing. I started leaving tiny marks with pencil under mouse pads, placing pens exactly perpendicular to notepads, logging the smallest details. And without fail, something would shift. Not stolen, not trashed, just moved, repositioned, nudged out of alignment by someone who knew I'd notice. I checked the logs. No one else was scheduled to be in the building during my shift. I scanned the badge reader history. Only mine. And still I'd hear the faint creak of a door 2 rooms away when I was in the stairwell, or the soft wheeze of a swivel chair turning in an empty office. I stopped using my earbuds. I needed to hear, and when I did, I began to notice patterns, footsteps that echoed faintly above me, even when I was on the top floor. A cough, sharp and dry, that came from the men's restroom every night at exactly 1:17 a.m., even when no lights had been turned on in there for hours. I filed a report with the company. They shrugged it off. Maybe a tenant's staying late. Don't worry about it unless you catch someone breaking in. So I set up a trap. On a Wednesday night, I arrived early and wedged a slip of paper between the stairwell door and the frame on each floor. Then I locked every suite I wasn't cleaning. One by one, I worked the floors, checking my traps. At 2:33 a.m., I returned to the second floor. The paper on the door was gone. I unlocked the stairwell and looked. No one. Just the hallway, quiet and still. But the door to the HR firm at the end of the corridor was ajar. I had locked it. I was sure of it. I pushed it open slowly. The lights were off. I stepped inside and called out. Nothing. I swept the flashlight over the cubicles, all empty, until I saw it. One of the desk chairs was spinning. Not wildly. Just a gentle turn, like someone had stood up moments before I entered. The air smelled faintly of cigarettes, but the building had been non-smoking for over a decade. I turned to leave and noticed the computer monitor flicker on behind me. It was on the login screen. A name was already typed in. Louis C. I remembered that name. It was listed in the directory by the entrance, but next to it there was a small black ribbon taped over the photo. When I got back to the janitor's closet, I opened the incident log from the building's emergency contact binder. Something I hadn't touched before. I flipped back 2 years. A single sheet was stapled to the July entries. Incident on floor 2. Employee found deceased after hours. No signs of forced entry. Office was locked from the inside. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I looked at the log for the day prior. The same employee had complained about items being moved on their desk, a coffee mug he didn't recognize showing up every morning. The company dismissed it as stress. I could have quit. I probably should have, but something about the quiet tension of that building at night pulled at me. I started leaving earlier, arriving at 9 a.m. instead of 10 a.m., trying to catch whoever was playing games. I set up my phone camera in the hallway one night, aimed at the door I'd seen swing open. When I watched the footage the next day, I nearly dropped the phone. At 1:04 a.m., the door opened, but not like it was pushed. It unlocked, turned, opened slowly, and no one came out. No one went in. Just a long, slow creak and then stillness. I told the company I was done. Gave them a 1-day notice. They didn't even ask why. That final night, I went back to clear out my locker. On a whim, I took the elevator to the 4th floor, even though my shift had ended hours ago. As I stepped out, I saw it. A fresh coffee mug on a plastic-wrapped cubicle desk. The plastic was still sealed. The office hadn't been used in months. I walked over and picked up the cup. It was still warm. I put it down and turned to leave. That's when the lights cut off. I froze. Total blackness. Then, footsteps. Light. Close. They stopped just behind me, and I heard a voice, low and calm. "You forgot to clock out." I never expected moving into that apartment would become one of the worst decisions of my life. I was desperate for a place, fast and cheap. The listing was a little vague, described as a cozy 1-bedroom on a quiet street, available immediately. The rent was lower than anything else I'd seen in the city, so I called the landlord and arranged to see it that afternoon. When I arrived, the building was older but well kept. The landlord was a middle-aged woman who barely looked up from her paperwork but handed me the keys and said, "Quiet neighbors. No parties. No noise complaints." That seemed fair. The apartment itself was small but clean. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, and windows facing a narrow alley. I moved in the next day, eager to start fresh. At first, everything seemed normal. The neighbors were polite but distant. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. No sounds from adjacent units. No footsteps overhead or below. Even the street outside was oddly still. Sometimes when I walked in the hallway, I'd notice the faint scent of cleaning products, but no sign of anyone else. The landlord never responded to my messages except to confirm rent was received. I liked my privacy, so I wasn't bothered. But soon the silence started to feel oppressive. A few weeks in, I began noticing subtle things. The mail slot sealed shut. No mail delivered. No flyers slipped under the door. I thought maybe the landlord collected it. Then at night I'd hear faint noises. Not footsteps, not voices. More like whispers. Indistinct, coming from the walls themselves. The building was old, sure, but I never heard anything this strange before. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was the wind or my imagination. But when I told a friend about it, he suggested installing a baby monitor to record the sounds. I set the monitor near the living room window one night. When I played back the recording, my blood ran cold. There was the faintest sound of breathing. Not mine, not anyone I knew. Deep, slow inhales, barely audible but unmistakable. I lived alone. No pets, no visitors. The landlord's voice never came on the intercom. I called her once, asking if there were maintenance people or other tenants. She said no. The apartment was strictly single occupancy. That's when I realized something was wrong. Days later, I returned from work to find my door slightly ajar. I was sure I'd locked it that morning. Inside, nothing was taken. Nothing moved, except my bed sheets, rumpled as if someone had lain down. I checked the windows. Locked. The landlord insisted no one else had keys. I called the police, but they said without evidence of forced entry or theft, there was little they could do. I started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow. Every night the breathing grew louder, closer. Sometimes I'd wake up, feeling a weight on my chest, like someone was watching. I stopped turning on the lights before bed, hoping darkness would help me see whatever was there. One night I woke to a whisper right by my ear. "Don't be afraid." My heart nearly stopped. I spun around, but no one was there. I packed a bag, planned to leave that night. But when I went to the door, it was locked from the outside. My keys wouldn't work. I pounded on the door, screamed for help, but the hallway stayed silent. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching from the other side. They stopped. I held my breath. The door handle turned, slowly, then stopped. A voice, calm and cold, said, "You're not going anywhere." I never saw the landlord again. The next morning, the apartment was empty. No note, no explanation, just silence and the faint echo of breathing. I took the late-night delivery job mostly for the money. The company promised quiet shifts, few deliveries, and decent pay. At first, it was exactly that. Driving from restaurant to apartment, dropping off food to people who ordered after midnight. Most nights I was alone in the car, windows down, music low, watching empty streets slip by. It wasn't glamorous, but it was predictable. Until one night, about 2 weeks in, everything changed. My last delivery was to a small apartment complex in a part of town I barely knew. The address was vague, the building number and street name, but nothing more. When I pulled up, the place looked deserted. No lights on except one on the 3rd floor. I took the food and headed to the stairwell. The door was unlocked, which struck me as odd. I climbed the stairs slowly. Each step creaked underfoot, echoing in the empty hall. When I reached the 3rd floor, the light came from a single apartment at the end of the corridor. I knocked. No answer. Knocked again, louder this time. Nothing. The door was slightly ajar. I hesitated, then pushed it open. Inside was dark, furniture covered in sheets, the smell of stale air and dust. No sign of anyone living there. I placed the food on a table and stepped back toward the door, but it slammed shut. I tried the handle. Locked. I rattled it, but no response from inside. I called out, but only silence. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me. Turning sharply, no one was there. The stairwell was empty. I started pounding on the door, shouting for help. Finally, muffled voices answered, but not human voices. Low, distorted, almost a whisper coming from inside the apartment. Suddenly, the door unlocked and swung open. No one visible. I bolted down the stairs, heart pounding. When I reached the street, my car was gone. My phone had no signal. I was trapped. For 3 hours I wandered, trying every door and window in the building. Each time the same unsettling silence greeted me. Then at dawn I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. Quickening pace, I reached a main road and flagged down a passerby. They called the police. When officers arrived and searched the building, they found the apartment empty. No furniture, no food, no sign I had ever been there. They told me the building had been condemned months ago, declared unsafe. Yet somehow I'd been inside, trapped for hours. The last thing they found was a crumpled receipt from my delivery tucked beneath the front door. To this day, I don't know who ordered that food, or why they never came to answer. When I moved into my new apartment, I thought I'd found a quiet little sanctuary from the chaos of the city. The building was old but maintained, with neighbors who kept to themselves. I barely noticed the man in the unit beside mine. He never spoke, never greeted anyone in the hall. Sometimes I'd hear faint noises, the occasional clink of dishes, footsteps in the evening, but nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. Months passed and I grew used to the silence, even welcomed it. That was, until the day I realized I hadn't seen him in weeks. No lights in his window, no mail at his door, nothing. I mentioned it casually to the building manager, who shrugged and said the man paid rent but hadn't been seen in months. One night I woke to a noise I couldn't place. It was subtle, a soft scraping coming from the wall next to my bed. I thought it was the pipes at first, or maybe the old plaster settling. The sound came again, then stopped. I stayed awake for hours trying to listen, but the apartment was silent afterward. The next day I knocked on his door. No answer. Tried again a few days later. Still nothing. Curious and a little uneasy, I asked other neighbors. They all said the same thing. No one had seen him for a long time, but the rent always got paid on time. Weeks later, the scraping noises returned, this time louder. At random hours, often when I was alone. Sometimes I thought I saw shadows moving behind the curtains of his window, but when I looked closer, there was nothing. I checked with the manager again, who revealed the place had been vacant for some time, officially. That meant no one was supposed to be living there, yet the lights would flicker on occasionally, and sounds kept coming. I started installing small cameras in the hallway near his door, hoping to catch someone entering or leaving. The footage showed nothing. No visits, no deliveries, no sign of life. One night I was awoken by the scraping again. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the door. The sound was coming from inside. Heart pounding, I tried the handle. Locked. I called the manager, who insisted the door hadn't been opened in weeks. When I finally convinced him to let me in with a master key, what I saw inside was chilling. Bare floors, peeling wallpaper, and walls scratched deeply as if something had tried to claw its way out. In one corner, a pile of old newspapers and empty food containers. No furniture, no bed, nothing but dust and silence. And then I noticed it. A set of footprints, fresh and dusty, leading toward a loose panel near the floor. The panel was slightly ajar, revealing a narrow crawl space beyond. I reported everything to the police. They investigated but found no evidence of squatters. No signs of forced entry. The landlord said the previous tenant had disappeared months ago. Nobody knew where. The strange noises stopped after that, but I never forgot the footprints, or the fact that someone, or something, had been living unseen in that crawl space, right next to me, for who knows how long. I just accepted a job as a night security guard at an aging apartment complex on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that once had a thriving community but was now mostly empty, with tenants who came and went quietly, shadows moving behind curtains late at night. My duties were simple: patrol the grounds, check doors and windows, report anything unusual. The building was old, the paint peeling but structurally sound. Management warned me there had been minor incidents in the past, nothing serious, but to stay alert. I thought it was just typical company talk to keep me on my toes. The first few nights were routine. I walked the perimeter, checked locks, radioed in my rounds. No disturbances. The tenants I met were polite but reserved, reluctant to linger in hallways after dark. One tenant, an older woman on the third floor, gave me a wary smile but said little else. On the fifth floor, a young man moved in halfway through my first week. He never said hi, but I saw him once or twice sitting by the window, staring out at nothing. The stairwell smelled faintly of damp wood and dust, and the creaks of the building felt like the house breathing around me. About 10 days in, things changed. I was making my usual rounds when I noticed a door on the second floor. A storage closet that was supposed to be locked at all times was slightly ajar. I hadn't seen it open before. I radioed the manager. They told me it should have been locked and that no one had clearance. I tried the door gently. It swung open easily, revealing a dark, narrow space packed with old boxes and cleaning supplies. I closed it and locked it behind me, making a note to check the security footage. The camera showed no one had been near that door in over 24 hours. That night, the closet door was open again. I decided to keep an eye on it. The next night, as I patrolled the second floor, I heard faint sounds, a soft shuffle like footsteps dragging on carpet. I followed the noise to the closet. The door was open. I felt a chill but stepped inside. Nothing. Just boxes and cleaning tools. I closed the door, but when I turned, I caught a glimpse of something moving behind the stairwell window. I aimed my flashlight and saw nothing but dark shadows. I radioed the manager again. They dismissed it as the wind or an animal, but I was certain something was off. Over the next week, the sounds grew louder. Whispers in the hallways when no one else was there. Footsteps echoing behind me as I checked locks. Doors opening and closing on their own. One night I found a note slipped under the security office door. Just 3 words. "Help me, please." The handwriting was shaky, desperate. I showed it to the manager, who looked uneasy but said it was probably a prank. I didn't believe it. Late one night, as I did my rounds, I heard heavy breathing coming from behind the storage closet. I pressed my ear to the door. The breathing was ragged, uneven, someone struggling, trapped. I called out, "Hello? Are you okay?" No answer. The breathing stopped abruptly. I unlocked the door and flicked on my flashlight. The room was empty, except for a small worn blanket folded neatly on a shelf. I pulled the blanket down and found a folded piece of paper inside. It read, "They're watching. Don't trust the new tenant." My heart pounded. New tenant. I remembered the young man on the 5th floor. I tried to contact that tenant the next day, but the door was locked. No answer to calls or knocks. Other tenants said they hadn't seen him in days. The manager claimed he had moved out suddenly. That night I stayed late, watching the building from the security office. Around midnight, the building's main power flickered and went out. Emergency lights cast long shadows in the hallways. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the 5th floor. The door to the tenant's unit was wide open. Inside, the room was empty except for a chair turned over and marks on the wall. Scratches as if someone had clawed at the paint. The windows were locked tight. I felt eyes on me. I turned slowly. A figure stood in the doorway, barely visible in the dim light. When I asked who they were, they vanished. No footsteps, no sound, just gone. I ran down the stairs and out into the cold night air. I never returned to that job. Months later, I learned the young man had been reported missing shortly after I left. No clues, no leads. The storage closet was sealed off indefinitely. Sometimes I wonder what I almost walked into. Who left that note? Who was trapped behind the locked door? And most chilling of all, who or what was watching? I was hired to work the overnight shift at a small-town gas station on the edge of a highway, a spot barely used except by truckers and late-night travelers. The owner promised quiet nights, easy hours, and no trouble. I was fresh out of college, needed the money, and figured it would be a good way to keep my mind off things. The station was old but functional, flickering neon lights outside, a cramped convenience store inside with shelves stocked just enough to keep a few regulars satisfied. My duties were simple: man the register, keep an eye on the pumps, and restock shelves during slow periods. No one warned me about the place's history or what happened on the last shift before mine. The first few nights were, as promised, uneventful. The odd traveler stopped for gas, a few bought snacks, and then drove off. But after about a week, I began to notice strange things, small details that didn't add up, like the old payphone behind the counter that sometimes rang when no one was around, or the flicker of headlights outside, pulling in without any engine noise. Sometimes I'd catch movement on the security cameras, shadows crossing the lot when I was sure no one was there. I chalked it up to my imagination or faulty wiring, but the unease settled in anyway. Then came the night I saw her. It was close to midnight when the bell above the door jingled softly. I looked up to see a woman in her late 30s, drenched from rain, eyes wide and panicked. She said her car broke down on the highway and needed to use the phone. I handed her the receiver, but the line was dead. She asked if she could wait inside for a tow truck. I agreed, though I felt an instinctual hesitation. She sat quietly in a corner, wrapped in a thin jacket, occasionally glancing at the door as if expecting someone. Her hands trembled slightly. Minutes passed. The store's lights flickered, and the old radio behind the counter hissed static. Then, without warning, the woman's expression changed. Her eyes went distant, blank, and her voice dropped to a whisper. She told me a story about the gas station's last shift years ago, when a clerk disappeared without a trace. The story was chilling. How no one knew what happened, just that the shift ended, and the clerk was never seen again. She said the place was haunted by the fear of being watched, by the presence of someone or something that lurked in the shadows waiting. I wanted to dismiss it as a tale to scare a stranger, but then I heard footsteps behind the shelves, faint but deliberate. I told her it was probably the night janitor doing rounds. She shook her head. There's no janitor at night, not anymore. The power cut out, pitch black. The emergency light struggled to flicker on, casting long, eerie shadows. The woman stood abruptly and whispered, "Don't look behind you." I froze. The air grew cold, heavy. I heard breathing, slow and uneven, just inches from my ear. I dared not turn around. Then the radio burst to life with a sudden burst of static, drowning out everything. When the lights returned, the woman was gone. The door was locked from the outside. I spent the next hours pacing, trying every window and door, locked tight. My phone had no signal. The cameras all showed static except one, the feed from the parking lot. There I saw a figure standing just beyond the headlights of a parked car. But as I leaned in, the figure dissolved like mist. Eventually I was found by a passing motorist at dawn, disoriented and shaken. The gas station owner had no idea I'd been inside overnight. He claimed the building had been closed for months for renovations, no staff assigned. The woman? Never existed, at least according to the records, and the clerk who disappeared. The story was true, but what happened to him, or to me that night, I still can't explain. The only proof I have is the faint, lingering scent of rain and that whisper in my ear. Don't look behind you. I moved into that building because I needed a fresh start, a place far enough from my old life where I could focus on myself without distractions. It was an aging complex, the kind where the floors creaked in ways that made you question if you were alone, and where the flicker of the fluorescent lights sometimes felt like the pulse of the building itself. My apartment was small, with a window that faced the dimly lit hallway, and across from me was apartment 7B. I first noticed the tenant there not because of any interaction, but because of absence. No one ever saw him during the day. The blinds were always drawn tight, the door always shut. But come nightfall, around 10 or 11, a faint warm orange light would glow behind the curtains. Sometimes I'd hear low muffled sounds, faint music, static from a TV, the scratch of a record maybe. It was always just enough noise to catch your attention, but never enough to make out what it was. I never saw him in the hallways, but occasionally when I glanced out just right, I'd catch a shadow moving behind those curtains. I told myself he was probably just a quiet man with a peculiar schedule, maybe working nights or recovering from something difficult. But as days passed, the eerie feeling around 7B grew heavier. Packages started to appear outside my door, always at night, always when I was asleep. They were small and odd, a broken wristwatch with the glass shattered, a torn photograph of a family standing on a beach, a box containing a single black glove, and sometimes just an old faded note with handwriting I couldn't decipher. I never ordered any of these things, and none had return addresses. I began to worry someone was watching me. One night while I was brushing my teeth, I heard a strange scraping noise outside my door. Peeking through the peephole, I saw the faint outline of the man from 7B carrying a large bulky object wrapped tightly in plastic. He moved slowly, carefully scanning the empty hallway before descending the stairs. My heart raced and I debated whether to follow. Eventually, I slipped on a jacket and quietly trailed behind him. He left the package in the stairwell landing and disappeared into his apartment, the door closing softly behind him. The next morning, I reported it to the building manager. They seemed uncomfortable but claimed no one was supposed to be leaving packages in the hallways. When I went back to the stairwell, the package was gone, as if it had vanished into thin air. Over the following nights, the pattern continued. Strange sounds outside my door, brief glimmers of movement in the hallway, and then the silent deliveries of strange objects. I felt trapped in a nightmare where I was the only one awake. The feeling of being watched became overwhelming. At night, my apartment felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. Every creak, every whisper of wind, every shadow made my skin crawl. One evening, I looked through the peephole and saw him, standing silently, eyes locked on my door. Our gazes met, and for a moment I felt my breath catch. Then, without a word, he turned and vanished. The final straw came one night when I awoke to the unmistakable sound of my front door key turning slowly in the lock. Frozen with fear, I watched the door open a crack. Through the narrow opening, I could see his pale face, almost translucent in the hallway light. His eyes held no expression, no warmth, only cold detachment. He didn't speak. He didn't move further inside. I slammed the door shut, bolted every lock I could, and stayed awake the entire night. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door, thin and fragile. "You can't hide forever." No signature, no explanation. My sense of safety was shattered. I moved out that day, desperate to escape, but the strange deliveries didn't stop. Weeks after leaving, new packages appeared outside my new apartment. The same cracked watch face, torn photographs, and now a vial filled with an unknown liquid. I never opened it. And every night, long after the world was quiet, I heard footsteps outside my window. Slow, steady, patient. No matter where I go, I feel that same cold gaze watching, waiting for the moment I stop running. The man in apartment 7B is no longer tied to a place. He's a shadow that follows, a reminder that some fears can't be left behind. I took the lease on that old townhouse mostly because it was affordable and close enough to my new job. The building had been empty for months, and I was told the last tenant left abruptly with no explanation. The landlord seemed eager to fill the vacancy and assured me the place was perfectly safe, just needed a little cleaning and some minor repairs. At first, I loved the solitude. The creaks and groans of the old house felt familiar, comforting even, like the building was alive and watching over me. But soon, subtle things started to unravel that calm. Small noises in the night, footsteps pacing the hallway outside my bedroom, the faint scent of cigarette smoke drifting through vents when no one was smoking. Doors I'd swear I'd locked or left slightly ajar the next morning. A low hum like a machine running somewhere in the walls, though I'd checked every room and found nothing. The first few nights I convinced myself it was just my imagination, the kind of things you think about when you're alone and new in a place. But then on the third night I woke to a soft tapping on the back door. Deliberate, slow, almost like someone was testing if I was awake. I stayed still, listening. The tapping stopped abruptly. When I checked, no one was there, but footprints, damp and muddy, led away from the door and disappeared into the garden. I locked all the windows and double-checked the doors, but a creeping unease settled in. It felt like someone was slipping through the shadows, watching and waiting. Days passed and I started noticing strange signs. Things moved slightly out of place. A picture frame tilted, though no draft could reach it. The keys I left on the kitchen counter went missing and reappeared hours later in the living room. My phone battery drained faster than normal, and sometimes I'd catch faint voices murmuring just beyond the walls, indecipherable, like a distant conversation. One evening I found a letter slipped under my bedroom door, written in shaky handwriting. "You don't belong here." I froze, heart pounding. There was no way someone could have gotten in without me hearing. Determined to find answers, I installed cameras inside the house, focusing on the hallway and the back door. Over the next week, I watched footage that both terrified and confused me. At night, faint shadows moved just beyond the camera's view, blurred figures that vanished whenever I tried to focus. On one recording, I saw the back door slowly creak open on its own, and then a silhouette slipped inside. The timestamp showed 3:13 a.m. The next morning, the door was locked tight. I confronted the landlord, who brushed off my concerns as paranoia. "Old houses make noises. Tenants come and go. You're probably just tired." But I knew better. The truth was buried somewhere in that place's history, a history no one wanted to talk about. I started digging through old news archives and found reports of a tenant who disappeared years ago without a trace. Rumors circulated about strange noises, unexplained lights, and an overwhelming sense of dread in the house, but nothing concrete, just whispers. One night I was jolted awake by the sound of someone whispering my name. The voice was close, breathy, urgent. I sat up, heart racing, and saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. A man, pale and gaunt, eyes sunken but burning with desperation. I tried to scream, but no sound came. The figure reached out, pointing toward the hallway, and vanished. I stumbled out of bed, flashlight in hand, and followed the direction he had indicated. In the hallway, the temperature dropped drastically. I heard the hum again, low, mechanical, coming from behind the laundry room door. When I opened it, I found nothing but a narrow crawl space I hadn't noticed before. I squeezed inside, flashlight barely illuminating the cramped area, when my light caught something. A dusty box filled with old newspaper clippings about the missing tenant, photos, personal letters. It was clear someone had been keeping tabs on the house's secrets. Suddenly I heard footsteps pounding above me, heavy and fast, as if someone was running. The crawl space entrance slammed shut. I was plunged into darkness, heart hammering, trapped and alone with the echo of footsteps that seemed impossibly close, yet just beyond reach. The whispers returned, louder now, unintelligible but full of anger and sorrow. I don't remember how long I was down there. When I finally forced the door open and crawled out, the house was silent. The sun was rising, casting pale light over the peeling wallpaper and cracked floors. I left immediately and never returned. To this day, I don't know what or who I encountered that night, but I still feel its presence every time I close my eyes. The last tenant's story was never solved. The house still stands, waiting for the next resident, brave or unlucky enough to uncover its secrets. When I moved into my new apartment, I was looking for a quiet place where I could finally settle down after years of moving from city to city. The building wasn't fancy, but it had a calm energy, and for the first few weeks I thought I'd made the right choice. The neighborhood was peaceful, and I barely saw my neighbors. That changed one evening when I noticed the apartment directly across the hall. A unit whose curtains were always tightly shut during the day, but at night a single window would light up, faint and amber. The light was dim and irregular, flickering in a way that made me wonder if someone was watching TV or maybe burning candles. Over time, I became aware of a strange rhythm to the light. It would come on just after sunset, stay on for hours, then vanish before dawn. Curious but respectful, I didn't pry at first, but then subtle things began to unsettle me. I'd hear soft thumps against the walls at night, rhythmic and deliberate, sounds of movement just beyond my door. Sometimes I'd find small objects, a folded piece of paper, a hairpin, a faded photograph, slipped beneath my door. No notes, no messages, just these silent tokens that suggested someone was trying to communicate. I considered the possibility of a prank, but there was something too purposeful about it all. One night I caught a faint glimpse of a figure standing behind the lit window across the hall, a tall silhouette, watching, but always just out of focus. The feeling that I was being observed, even monitored, crept under my skin. Days grew into weeks, and the disturbances escalated. The noises became more frequent, more urgent. My phone buzzed at odd hours with messages from unknown numbers, empty texts or strange strings of characters that seemed like codes. I tried blocking the numbers, changing my routines, but the sense of intrusion only deepened. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night to find the door to my apartment slightly ajar, even though I was sure I'd locked it. The idea of a break-in terrified me, but nothing was ever taken or disturbed beyond those subtle signs. One evening after returning from work, I noticed the flickering light in the neighbor's window was gone. The apartment was completely dark. It felt like a pause, an eerie silence that wrapped itself around the whole building. Then, as I settled in for the night, I heard tapping on my window. Slow, soft, deliberate. Heart pounding, I approached cautiously. Outside, no one was there, but pressed against the glass was a folded note. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single sentence. "I see you." My anxiety spiraled. I told a few trusted friends, but without proof. They thought I was imagining things. I installed a security camera inside my apartment, aiming it toward the door and window. Over the next few nights, I reviewed the footage obsessively. One night around 2 a.m., the camera caught a shadow slipping through the hallway. The figure moved with unnerving calm, pausing in front of my door as if testing the locks, then vanishing into the darkness. I contacted the building manager, but he dismissed my concerns, citing a lack of complaints from other tenants. I was left alone with the feeling of being hunted, trapped in a cage made of walls and silence. The flickering light from the neighbor's window returned sporadically, sometimes accompanied by faint whispers that seemed to echo through the walls, just out of earshot. One night, unable to bear it any longer, I decided to confront whoever was behind the window. I waited until the light came on, then knocked firmly on the neighbor's door. No answer. I called out, but only silence returned. I pressed my ear to the door and thought I heard breathing, slow, uneven, almost desperate. Then the lights in the hallway flickered, and the window opposite me went dark again. Weeks later, I received another note, slipped under my door with no signature. It read, "You're not alone." I never found out who the neighbor was or what they wanted, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear footsteps pacing just beyond the walls, and the flickering amber light returns to haunt my windows. I never imagined a simple phone call could change everything. It started one quiet evening when my phone rang just after dinner. The number was unknown, an area code I didn't recognize. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. When I answered, there was only silence. No static, no background noise, just a breath. Then the line went dead. I shrugged it off as a prank call or a wrong number, but the calls didn't stop. Every few days, the phone rang at odd hours, always silent on the other end. The silence began to weigh on me, heavy and unsettling. I started logging the calls. Time, length, nothing else. Sometimes they lasted just a second. Sometimes the line stayed open for minutes without a sound. I asked my phone company if there was any way to trace the source, but they said it was impossible without involving law enforcement. I didn't want to go that far yet. I just wanted it to stop. Then the calls started coming during the day. I'd be at work or out running errands and the phone would ring, only silence. My friends thought I was losing it. Maybe it's someone messing with you, they said. Ignore it. But I couldn't. I felt watched, targeted. It was like a whisper from the dark, reminding me I wasn't alone. One night after a particularly long day, the phone rang again. This time when I answered, I heard a faint voice, so low it was almost a whisper. "Help me," it said. Then silence. My blood ran cold. I called the number back, but it was disconnected. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe it was a prank, but the words echoed in my mind. The calls grew more frequent and intense. Sometimes I'd pick up to hear muffled sounds, like someone struggling to breathe or distant cries. Other times the silence felt suffocating. I became paranoid, checking over my shoulder, jumping at every noise. I changed my number, but the calls continued, now coming to my new phone within hours. Desperate, I started digging into the number history, searching online for similar reports. I found a few cases. People receiving silent calls followed by strange events. Disappearances, break-ins, unexplained noises. It was like a chain reaction. A dark thread weaving through lives, connecting victims. One night I was home alone when the phone rang again. This time I didn't answer. Instead I let it ring, watching the caller ID flash. After several rings, the call ended. Moments later, my doorbell rang. Heart pounding, I peeked through the peephole. No one there. Just a small package on the doorstep. Inside was an old cracked cell phone with the screen shattered. It was my number. I didn't know what to do. I contacted the police, but without a direct threat, they couldn't help much. I installed cameras, changed locks, and stayed with friends whenever I could. The calls slowed but never stopped completely. They became a haunting reminder that something was wrong, that someone or something was reaching out from the shadows. Months later, I received one last call. This time the voice was clear. "Find me." Then silence. It was a plea, a demand, a curse. I knew I had to uncover the truth behind the silent calls before it was too late, before I became the next lost voice in the endless void. When I first moved into my suburban neighborhood, everything seemed normal. Quiet streets, friendly faces, the usual sounds of lawnmowers and distant children playing. My house sat next to an old vacant property that had been empty for years. The previous owners long gone with no one moving in. The place looked abandoned, overgrown lawn, cracked windows, peeling paint. I never paid it much attention. That changed after the first strange night. One evening as I sat reading, I noticed a faint light flickering in the upstairs window of the empty house. Curious, I thought maybe someone had moved in without telling the neighbors, but the place still looked untouched from the outside. The next few nights, the flickering continued, always at odd hours, sometimes brief, sometimes lasting for hours. It wasn't like a steady light, but more like someone was using candles or a faulty bulb that barely stayed lit. The air around the house seemed heavier at night, thicker somehow. Then the noises began. Faint footsteps on the porch late at night, the creak of floorboards inside, doors opening and closing when no one should have been there. Sometimes I'd hear muffled voices, hushed and urgent, but I never caught words clearly. I told myself it was just my imagination or the house settling, but the feeling of being watched grew. I started locking my doors early, pulling my curtains tighter, but the unease never left. One morning I found the front gate of the vacant house wide open. No sign of anyone around, no footprints in the soft dirt, just the gate swinging gently in the breeze. That night I heard knocking at my back door, slow, deliberate, like someone testing to see if I was home. I looked outside but saw no one. A note was taped to the door handle. "Don't trust the quiet." I reported the incidents to the local police, but without evidence, they couldn't do much. Neighbors told me stories of the previous owners disappearing without explanation, leaving the house to rot. Some said the place was cursed. Others whispered about secret rooms and hidden pasts. I wasn't sure what to believe, but every time I glanced at the empty house, I felt the weight of its secrets pressing down. One night I awoke to the sound of footsteps on my roof. Heart pounding, I grabbed my phone and flashlight, stepping outside into the cold. The street was empty. I looked up, but no one was there. The flickering light appeared again in the upstairs window of the vacant house, brighter this time, as if inviting me to look closer. The next morning I found deep scratches on my front door, as if someone or something had tried to get in. Over the following weeks, the disturbances escalated. My phone glitched with static. Strange shadows moved just beyond my vision, and whispers followed me when I was alone. The quiet house next door was no longer empty, and whatever was inside was watching, waiting for something. I began to question my own sanity as the line between reality and nightmare blurred. One night, unable to bear the fear any longer, I decided to confront the house. I waited until the flickering light came on, and then approached the front door. It creaked open slowly before I could knock. Inside, the air was cold and stale, filled with dust and the scent of decay. As I stepped further in, I felt eyes on me from the darkness, a presence cold and unforgiving. The door slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside with the house's silent secrets. It started with a simple noise. I was living alone in a modest apartment after a tough breakup, trying to rebuild my life. One night around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of quiet footsteps outside my door. Slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth. My heart froze. I lay perfectly still, listening. The footsteps stopped, then resumed, sometimes closer, sometimes retreating. I didn't know who it was or why they were there, but the feeling of being watched overwhelmed me. I never heard a knock, never saw a shadow in the hallway, but every night after that, the footsteps returned. Same time, same slow rhythm. I told myself it was probably just someone passing by, or the building settling, but there was no way to explain the faint tapping on my door that followed, or the subtle scraping noise, like someone dragging their nails along the wood. I started locking every deadbolt and placing heavy furniture against the door. The police said without proof, there was little they could do. My neighbors either ignored my concerns or told me to toughen up. One night, after days of relentless pacing outside, the door handle turned slowly, a chilling sound in the silence. I held my breath, clutching my phone, ready to call 911. But the door didn't open. The handle stopped moving and the footsteps retreated down the hall. I didn't sleep for nights after. The paranoia grew. I installed security cameras inside my apartment, aiming them at the door and windows. Reviewing the footage was both terrifying and confusing. Several nights showed vague shapes moving outside the door. Sometimes a figure standing motionless, sometimes just shadows flickering. I never saw a face, never caught a name. The sense of being stalked was constant. Then strange things started appearing inside my apartment. Small objects moved. My keys left on the counter vanished, only to be found later under the couch. A photograph I kept on my nightstand was turned face down. My laptop opened on its own one morning, displaying a blank document with the word "watching" typed repeatedly. I was losing control. Desperate, I reached out to a private investigator. He suggested it could be someone obsessed, an ex, a neighbor, someone with access to my building. We tried to find clues, but the trail always went cold. The stalker was careful, methodical, always staying just out of reach. Every time I thought I was safe, the footsteps returned, the tapping resumed. One night I woke to my phone ringing. Unknown number. I answered and a voice whispered my name, breathless and close. Then the line went dead. I reported it, but it was another dead end. The breaking point came when I found a note slipped under my door. It was handwritten, shaky and simple. "You can't hide." Fear consumed me. I moved out that week, leaving behind my belongings, my memories, and the nightmare that had become my life. But even after moving, I felt it. The footsteps echoing in my mind, the tapping lingering on my skin. I changed my number again, but the silent calls followed me. I realized some things don't end with a change of address. Some shadows follow you, patient and relentless, waiting for the moment you let your guard down. When I signed the lease for my new apartment, the building had a reputation for being quiet and safe, the kind of place where everyone kept to themselves. The rent was reasonable, and I needed stability after years of chaos. The landlord handed me the keys without much fuss, mentioning that the previous tenant had left suddenly, but gave no details. At first, everything felt normal. I settled in, unpacked my things, and started to enjoy the calm. Then came the noises. It started subtly, a faint tapping on the wall behind my bedroom late at night, like someone rapping their knuckles gently but deliberately. At first I thought it was plumbing or the building settling, but the sound was too rhythmic, too purposeful. It wasn't random. It felt like a message. I tapped back lightly, but there was no response. Over the following days, the knocking grew louder and more frequent, always at odd hours, never during the day. I tried talking to neighbors, but most kept their distance. One elderly woman told me that the apartment next door had been empty for months, that the tenant before me had disappeared without a trace. She warned me to be careful, but I shrugged it off. Still, the sense of being watched grew. At night, I'd hear footsteps pacing outside my door, slow and steady, as if someone was waiting. But when I checked, the hallway was always empty. One evening, I was working late when the power went out suddenly. The whole building was dark, save for a single flickering light in the vacant apartment next door. The light pulsed like a heartbeat, casting eerie shadows that danced against the cracked walls. I tried calling the landlord, but no answer. Then through the silence, I heard a voice, low, distorted, barely audible, whispering my name. My skin prickled with fear, and I quickly unplugged my phone and closed the windows. The next day, I found scratch marks on my door frame, deep and jagged, as if claws had scraped at the wood. There was no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing except those chilling marks. I considered moving, but something kept me rooted. I needed to know what was happening. I set up cameras inside my apartment, focusing on the walls and the door. The footage was disturbing. Shadows flickered just beyond the frame, and on several nights I saw the silhouette of a figure standing silently in the corner, always watching. The landlord finally called me, his voice cold and clipped, warning me to stop causing trouble and reminding me the building was old and prone to quirks. But I knew it was more than that. The knocking turned into banging. The footsteps grew louder, sometimes pacing in frantic circles. One night I awoke to a hand pressing against my bedroom window, pale, almost translucent, but quickly withdrawn when I reached for my phone. I reached out to a friend who specialized in paranormal research, hoping for answers or at least reassurance. She told me stories of restless spirits clinging to places where they felt wronged, trapped between worlds. It was a comforting thought, but it did little to ease the fear that gripped me. Then on a stormy night, the knocking stopped. Silence settled in, thick and suffocating. I thought maybe the entity had moved on, until the doorbell rang. A long drawn-out chime, unlike anything I'd heard before. I didn't answer. The ringing stopped, but in its place came a whisper, so close it felt like it was in my ear. "You're not alone." I left the apartment the next morning, never looking back. The building still stands, quiet and imposing, waiting for the next tenant who will hear the knocks in the night and wonder if they're truly alone. When I moved into the old townhouse, it felt like the fresh start I desperately needed. The place wasn't modern by any means. Creaky floors, faded wallpaper, and that musty smell of something decades old. But it was home. The landlord had been vague about the history, only mentioning that the previous tenant left suddenly and that the house had been standing there for nearly a century. I was used to old places with quirks, so I brushed it off. But there was something about that house that unsettled me from the start. The first few nights I barely slept. At first it was the usual, creaks and groans from the house settling. But then I began hearing something else. Faint whispers, soft but persistent, as if carried through the walls themselves. I'd lie awake in bed, straining to catch the words, but they were always just out of reach, like a conversation happening in another room. I told myself it was the wind or maybe my imagination, but the feeling of being watched grew heavier with each passing night. One evening, while unpacking, I noticed the bookshelf in the living room was oddly placed. It leaned slightly against the wall, but the way it didn't line up properly made me curious. When I pushed it, I found it swung open, revealing a narrow door I hadn't seen before. It was old, its paint cracked and peeling, and locked tight with a rusted padlock. My landlord insisted it was just a storage closet and advised me not to bother with it. But the whispers, the cold chills down my spine, they all seemed to come from behind that door. I couldn't shake the urge to know what lay beyond. After days of debating, I bought a small lock-picking kit online and spent an anxious afternoon trying to open it. When the lock finally clicked open, the door creaked as I pulled it open, revealing a steep staircase that disappeared into darkness. The air that wafted out was thick with dust and something else, something stale and heavy that made me hesitate. With nothing but a flashlight, I descended slowly, each step echoing down the narrow stairwell. The walls were lined with cracked plaster, and my light flickered as the battery weakened. At the bottom was a small room barely larger than a closet, windowless and suffocating. The floor was scattered with old papers, broken furniture, and layers of dust so thick it muffled my footsteps. In one corner lay a tattered diary. The leather cover was cracked and its pages yellowed with age. I sat down to read, my heart pounding as the entries unfolded the story of the previous occupant, a man who had lived in isolation, tormented by paranoia. He wrote about hearing footsteps pacing above, voices whispering his name through the walls, and shadows moving just out of sight. The last pages were frantic, filled with pleas for help and warnings about the house itself. After reading, I felt a cold dread settle deep in my bones. I hurried back upstairs, locking the door behind me. But the house felt different. The air grew colder, heavier. That night, the whispers grew louder, turning into incoherent murmurs that seeped into my dreams. I woke up shaking, sure that something unseen was watching me from the corners of the room. Days turned into weeks, and the haunting grew worse. Doors I'd locked were found open, objects moved or missing. I'd find scratches on the floorboards and hear footsteps pacing the hallway when I was home alone. Once I woke to the sensation of someone breathing heavily just inches from my face, but when I opened my eyes, nothing was there. My mental state frayed. I confided in a friend who told me that old houses sometimes hold memories of their former residents, especially if something tragic happened. But that didn't ease my fear. I felt trapped in a nightmare where every shadow could be a threat and every whisper a warning. One stormy night, the power cut out, plunging me into total darkness. The house groaned and creaked like a living thing, and the air was thick with tension. I lit candles and tried to calm myself, but then I heard it. A slow, deliberate knocking on the hidden door behind the bookshelf. I froze. The knocking grew louder and more urgent, like a desperate plea. I wanted to run, but something held me there, rooted in place. The next morning I found deep claw marks etched into the door, as if someone or something had been trying to escape. I packed a bag and left that house without looking back. The diary, the whispers, the cold presence. It was all too much. I moved into a new apartment far away, but sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I hear faint tapping on my walls. A soft whisper that just barely brushes my ear, reminding me that some places never truly let you go. I moved into an affordable, quiet apartment complex, hoping for peace and a fresh start. Most neighbors kept to themselves, which was fine by me. But the apartment next door always felt strange. The lights were almost never on, and I rarely saw anyone come or go. Late at night, faint noises would drift through the walls, whispers banging or the dragging of something heavy. It was subtle but unsettling. One evening I heard shouting from that apartment, panicked and desperate. I called out, but no one answered. The yelling stopped suddenly, replaced by silence. I debated calling the police, but decided against it, thinking it might be a private matter. In the days that followed, strange things continued. Trash bins filled with odd items, shredded papers, old clothes, broken electronics, appeared outside the apartment. Shadows moved behind drawn curtains, and I heard chains rattling through the walls. I asked a neighbor, but they warned me not to get involved. One night I came home late to find my door slightly ajar, though I was sure I'd locked it. On my kitchen table was a note written in shaky handwriting. "They're watching." I changed the locks, but the feeling of being watched only worsened. I started watching the next-door apartment closely. Deliveries arrived at odd hours. Packages left outside quickly vanished. The hallway echoed with faint voices and metallic clinks. I tried talking to neighbors, but they all evaded the subject or warned me to stay away. Then I saw a stranger enter the building through a back entrance, clutching something tightly, constantly glancing over their shoulder. When I tried calling the police, my phone lost service. It felt like someone was deliberately cutting me off. A new tenant moved into the apartment next door but disappeared after a week without explanation. The landlord claimed they changed their mind, but I knew better. One night, noises came from inside the walls, scraping and thudding. My bedroom walls shook slightly. I dismissed it as plumbing, but I was scared. Finally, I found a hidden crawl space behind the laundry room door, covered by a loose panel. Inside were chains, worn clothes, and personal belongings that didn't belong to anyone in the building. I found a journal filled with frantic entries about captivity and pleas for help. I left immediately, but the dread stayed. Even now, I sometimes hear faint whispers and footsteps echoing through the silence. The neighbor's secret was more than a mystery. It was a nightmare hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to find it.